Welcome to Gen X Adulting, and today we have author David La Torre with us. Welcome, David.
Hi, good morning, good afternoon, whatever time it is. I've been traveling, so I've kind of lost track of everything. So it's
Yeah,
great to be with you guys. Thanks for having me.
we're so happy to have you. And it's funny you say that because this is like end of school year for us with our youngest,
Right,
and I've lost
right.
track of time.
Us too.
He's
Yeah.
already acting like it's summer, and I'm thinking, no, you still are in school. We're losing control of the situation.
By the way, didn't school just start? And last week, I realized I look at the calendar and there's 2 weeks left of school here where I live in central Pennsylvania. I'm like, oh my goodness,
Yeah,
Yeah.
it
this
goes.
flies.
Now up there, you guys are done in 2 weeks as well, because we're
Oh yeah,
in Florida, and Georgia's the first out of the whole country, and then we're next. And I always thought, because we lived in Jersey for a while, Brian's from Jersey, our
yeah.
kids didn't get out in Jersey, our older two, until
Till
like
June.
mid-June.
Yeah.
Yeah, 2 more weeks. I don't know what the deal is. We go. Well, I can tell you what the deal is. We go earlier now. I mean, school started for our kids. I want to say like August 15th. So the idea being
Oh,
earlier start, earlier out for the school year and
hmm
for the summer. So
is that
it's changed. It's changed a little bit. I mean, remember when? That's it. By the way, I love the title of your podcast. I mean, because Gen X is such a part of my life, obviously, and I, I miss the days where the first day of school was the day after Labor Day.
Yep.
Yeah.
It was
Yeah.
great. That
uh,
Labor Day weekend was fantastic. You blew it out,
Yeah.
as a kid.
Absolutely. I grew up in Oregon, and both Jersey and Oregon was the day after Labor Day.
Right.
And I felt like you got the whole summer.
Yeah.
And then we moved here, and although they get out at the end of May, they start August 10th. And even though we get the full month of June and the full month of July, it still feels like you're not getting the whole summer,
I agree with you. I
you know?
agree. August, like it's all of a sudden you're like it's literally back to school.
Yeah.
August 1st is always like we got a month left. We got
Yes.
five
Yeah.
5 weeks, but not anymore.
You could still do vacation. Now, is that statewide in Pennsylvania? Did they change it across the board?
It listen, Pennsylvania doesn't do anything easy. There's 500 school districts here, okay, and none of them agree on anything. So the only thing that is mandated in Pennsylvania is I believe there has to be 180 learning days,
Yeah.
and
Okay.
even that can be virtual now since COVID's districts have discovered we can actually do virtual days. Like 2 weeks ago, we had a virtual day because there was some in-service thing going on with teachers. So that's really the only mandate we have. As far as starting and ending, that's up to each school district.
What a trip.
Yeah,
Wow,
it's
because it's
crazy.
across the board here, and you'd think Florida would be more wild.
Well, we go by county
We do,
Yeah,
but pretty much everyone starts around August.
within.
yeah,
Yeah,
Yeah.
it's not, no one's like, we're going to do after Labor Day. And there's no such thing as
right.
virtual days in Florida. There's none of
Yeah,
that.
lucky you. I mean,
Yeah.
that's I. I'm not a big believer in having a virtual day because something has to happen at school,
Yeah.
and the kids should be there. I don't have any problems with the virtual model of learning, period, but that's not what we signed up for.
Yeah, I
Yeah.
agree. Down here in Florida, if there's something like that, they just give them the day off. They're like, whatever,
Right,
that counts as a
right.
day off. So, okay, well, to get back to you, our first question is
Thanks.
always, what year were you born?
1970.
Okay, so you're Gen X.
Yes, proudly Gen X.
You're
The
right in the heart
last,
of it, right
Yep.
in the
the
heart
la-
of Gen X.
the last generation born before the internet.
Yes.
hmm
Yeah. Oh,
I mean,
we experienced many lasts and so many firsts. And we're the only generation, I think, that has gone through this unique experience of, all
right.
of it, all of it. It's such a trip. Where were you born?
Camp Hill, Pennsylvania, which is just outside of Harrisburg. I
Yep.
didn't try it, but I ended up. I live in Camp Hill. I'm sitting right here in Camp Hill, Pennsylvania, right now.
Okay. So you're near Hershey Park.
I am way too close to Hershey Park.
That's our
We,
favorite
I,
park.
yeah,
We
we are
love Hershey
season.
Park.
Our daughter has a season pass to Hershey Park, so she probably goes a half dozen times. I have a older son who's 26. I remarried, and he had a season. I had a season pass with him. We used to go all the time. And
Yeah.
listen, I love Hershey Park, but I'm sort of Hershey parked out.
Of
Yeah, I'm sure.
course. That's kind of us with Orlando. Like we
Oh, I'm
live
sure.
2.5 hours south of Orlando, and like Disney and Universal's great, but it's
Right.
not something that we're like, we need to go. But I'll tell you something, if we ever get a chance and over the years to go to Hershey Park for whatever reason, our whole family thinks as far as the coasters are the best,
Right.
but
Yeah,
it's
yeah.
the cleanest park. It's the
It is.
cleanest park.
Smells
It
good
is.
in the lodge too.
Yeah.
And yeah, it's so nice. You have so many great options to stay, and you can do different things. You can branch out from Hershey if you want to take a day off from the park. There's all kinds of things, but you're right. It's a great community, Hershey. Everything is clean about it too.
It is.
I have to tell you about Orlando. I grew up a big Disney person, but I love Universal theme parks. Like I
Yeah.
love those parks. I'm nerdy Harry Potter. My son got me into it. I love Harry Potter world. Like I just think Universal. Like, everybody talks about Disney, but the first thing I think of now is Universal and getting one of those super passes so you can go to the front of
Yeah.
every line of every ride.
It's so funny you say that because we moved to Florida in 2007 and we are Universal people. We had Universal
Right.
annual passes.
Nice.
I think we only went to Disney 3 times, and it was because our kids' 8th grade
We had
graduation was
to.
there. We had to.
Yeah.
But listen, you cannot beat if you stay on site, especially you get a fast pass automatically if you stay on
Yeah.
site.
Yeah.
So Universal is one of the few parks where you don't wait, you just do.
It's fantastic.
You do the whole day, and it is
Yep.
Harry Potter World. Now, have you been there and been able to do both of the Harry Potter worlds, Diagon Alley?
No, I haven't seen the second one yet, but that's cool. I'm kind of waiting to I go with my 26-year-old because I want to see him dress up like a nerdy Harry Potter kid at age 26. I can't wait to see that.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely. And the train goes in between the two parks, and the train is the whole Harry Potter experience too.
I know. I remember seeing the train. They had it with the first park, but I'm looking forward to seeing that whole connection. That's
It's
great.
awesome. It's awesome. If you go, just before I forget, when you listen back to
Mm-hmm.
the episode, whenever you guys plan that trip,
Yep.
contact me. I have like secret local tricks to do there that other people don't know about to help you.
Yeah, and I don't
Consider
like
it
giving
done.
them up.
I'm not giving him up.
No, consider it done. We will do it quietly.
Do
Now,
you think Hershey's going to open? I hear they're having the labor dispute there.
No, they'll be fine. Hershey Park will open.
I
Yeah.
didn't know that.
Yeah,
Oh,
Yeah.
and there's some.
There's always
Okay.
some rumblings at the beginning of the year, and then they tend to settle down. Look, this could be wrong the year that I'm on a podcast and actually say, no,
Yeah,
they'll
right.
open up.
We'll cut
But
that.
they won't. Yeah, but they probably they'll figure that out.
I hope so. It's too much of a cash cow too for the
No,
community. It needs
Yeah.
to
really
it needs
is.
to stay open. So, okay, so tell me again the name of the town you were born in.
It's 2 words: camp, like it sounds, in hill, Camp Hill.
Camp Hill. So, for Camp Hill, how many generations go back? Was that your grandparents settled there, your great grandparents, or your
Uh,
parents?
my grandparents. So my maternal grandparents in the Harrisburg area.
Okay.
I was born in Camp Hill because we're Catholic, and that's where the Catholic hospital is. So I was born in Camp Hill, but we were residents of Harrisburg City.
Okay.
Moved up into GenX suburbia in the mid '70s when people started moving out of cities. We moved up the river to an area called Dauphin or Middle Paxton Township. But my maternal grandparents, um, made their way to Steelton, Pennsylvania. The old steel town, Steelton, Pennsylvania. Lots of jobs there. Do it with the steel boom in American history, obviously, in the industrial age, and they made their way there. My paternal grandparents, my grandfather died in World War II. He served with the Italian Air Force, and when the Italians switched sides and aligned themselves with the Allies, Nazi Germany came over and pretty much split the country in two. My grandfather was captured and spent about a year and a half in labor camps, and before he was murdered March 31st, 1945, by Gestapo.
Wow. Do you know how old he was?
He was 32 years old. His death he was one of 71 Italian. They were not known as POWs. They were known as military internees because Hitler wanted to avoid giving them the rights of the Geneva Convention. So they technically weren't prisoners of war. They were this special classification. So they just basically made them work hard labor. brutal hard labor. He survived for a year and a half. He died what was known as the Easter Day Massacre of 1945.
Wow.
And that was in Kassel, Germany, coming home after a day of repairing train tracks from Allied bombs. And there was an abandoned rail car filled with food, and the townspeople in Kassel, the war was over at this point. It was just a matter of time, and they could hear the Allied guns in the background getting closer, and they encouraged the Italians to eat. And they said the Germans of the Nazis have fled. Go ahead and eat. Well, the Gestapo found out about it and showed up, and any Italian that had food on them was marched out to bomb craters and shot in the back of the head.
That's crazy.
Oh my
And the
God.
guy who was in charge of it, a monster by the name of Franz Marmon, got was tried after the war and got 2 years time served and
Oh,
released. And he,
jeez.
and he murdered 70 Italians. My grandfather almost made it to the end of the war. In fact, my grandmother got a letter 3 months after he died from the Red Cross, because records were so difficult back then, saying that your husband has been released and will be returning.
Oh
And
my God.
she didn't find out for well over a year that he had died, and then she came to America, to the Harrisburg, Pennsylvania area, where we already had relatives.
Okay, wait. So where was she? You're saying she came to America
She was
then?
in southern Italy, in Calabria, a town called San Pietro in Guarano, Italy.
Were
And
were they both Italian?
well, the complicated part of the story is my maternal grandmother was born in Halifax, Pennsylvania, one of 9 children to Aldo Magnelli, with Italian relatives. His brother and he had a sister that lived in Italy. And back then they were farmers and could not afford to take care of all their children. The relatives in Italy offered to take the 2 youngest daughters, one of which was my grandmother. So my grandmother was an American citizen, emigrated to Italy when she was a child, married my grandfather, and then after World War II, when she found out he died, came back to America because she had family in the Harrisburg area.
Okay, that makes sense. So your grandfather was Italian.
He was absolutely full-blooded Italian, born
Okay.
born
Okay.
in Calabria, Italy, the region of Calabria, Italy, which I will be going to this summer to retrace my family's
That's
past.
It is
very
cool.
cool. Very cool. Now,
Yeah.
how old was she when she found out he had died?
So he was 32. I believe she was 25, I want to say, at the time.
Had they gotten married like basically right before
Yeah.
he left for the war?
No, they had 3 children. They had my Aunt Anna Maria, who is still alive at age 88, my Aunt Teresa, who is 2 years younger than her, and my father, who is 4 years younger than my oldest aunt, who I'm still very close with.
So when she came over here, she brought her children, I assume. Your father and your two aunts?
The interesting thing is she had to come back before my Aunt Anna Maria turned 13, or she would have lost by relation, she would have lost her American citizenship. So my father and my 2 aunts were born with American citizenship because my grandmother was born in America. So they had to get back by a certain date. Now my father my father had to wait a number of years, because even though he was 8 years old at the end of the I'm sorry, he was 4 years old at the end of the war, and he's about 6 or 7 right now. He had to At this point he had to wait a couple years because he was a male. He was considered an enemy combatant. So
Really?
he so my mother had or my grandmother had to leave, took the 2 daughters with her. My father stayed with relatives, and when he was 11 years old, they put him on the Andrea Doria, which would later sink. He put him on the Andrea Doria and sailed him across to America by himself.
So that was what, 5 years without his
About
mother?
Yeah, which is very sort of common back then in World War II, and I remember my aunt telling me a story that they went for a summer. She went with her aunt to a summer retreat during the war, and the rail system got destroyed that connected where she lived to where they went. And for 3 years, she was stuck in that area and could not get home and could not contact her family because the mail traveled on the rail system. So back then, going a year, 2 years, even three during a time of war was not uncommon.
It's it's impossible for all of us to wrap our heads around that,
Right,
right? Like
Sounds
especially
with
in
our
this
own,
age
insane.
with a
yeah.
phone, like
Oh no.
I could text my son right now and be like, "Hey,
Yeah.
Dad, what's going on?"
Could you
We
even
didn't talk for
and
years.
I
Yeah.
can't imagine what your grandmother went through having to leave him too. But she had been through all this trauma, right? So when you go through
Right.
so much trauma, you kind of go into autopilot, you disassociate all that stuff. So I'm sure she was doing a lot of that, but still, she had to leave her son.
It's funny you say that because anytime anybody ever asked her about our grandfather, she was very short about it. Didn't want to talk about it. She never looked at another man, never went out on a date, came to America. I mean, forget about getting remarried, never dated, never.
Wow.
She mourned for the rest of her life until she died in 1982.
Sounds like she was just utterly traumatized and heartbroken from the
She
whole thing.
really, yeah, she really was. And for years we did not know where my grandfather died, and we did not know where he was buried. And then last year I started doing all the stuff on ancestry.com, and just trying to figure things out. I said, you know what? I'm really not good at this. There's only so far you can go on
Mhm.
websites like that. And then I hired and I recommend this to anybody. I hired their special unit called Ancestry Pro Genealogists, and I wanted my father's history researched. I have a lot of it on my mother's side, uh, West Virginia, Virginia, stuff like that. End up in Steelton, Pennsylvania, and they found not only did they find my grandfather, but they found his tombstone, and it had been on a website recognizing the Easter Massacre of 1945.
Wow.
And
Wow.
there was a whole website dedicated to it, and there's my grandfather's tombstone. And none of us knew this. And I immediately went over to my cousin's where my aunt lives, and showed her a picture of her father's tombstone. And then I'll try not to get emotional about it. Last July, we found him in Frankfurt, Germany, in a Italian military cemetery in Frankfurt, Germany. And I went and visited him last July and FaceTime. Talk about not being able to talk with people for years. I FaceTime my whole family from the cemetery, and I showed my aunt, his oldest daughter, her father's tombstone.
Wow.
And
Wow.
we didn't know for 80 years we did not know where he was. We kind of heard it was very hard to decipher. We could not get records, but the internet has really opened up so
Yeah.
many. As bad as the internet can be, it can be really wonderful too. And so we finally had the Italian government recognize his service. They had never recognized it, acknowledged his role as an international military internee, and the sacrifice he made for his country. See, the thing you have to understand about IMI is when the Nazis took over, and I know we're way off on a tangent here.
No, no, no,
When the,
no. You're good.
when the Nazis took
Yeah,
over
keep going.
Italy, gotcha. You had a choice in the Italian military: pledge loyalty to the Nazis or go to a prison camp, or maybe be executed or go to a prison camp. And 600,000 Italians chose labor or death over swearing allegiance to Hitler.
Wow.
They hated Mussolini. He was still there. He was a puppet. So many Italians that fought in that war for the Axis basically fought under threat, fought under duress,
Just survival.
knowing their families were back home. And my grandfather refused, and he died for it. And he was just awarded. They created a special medal in 2008. I found out, called the basically the Medal of Honor, far different than the American Medal of Honor, which is the highest form of reverence for, and rightly so, for our American military. But they created a Medal of Honor for the IMI to acknowledge their sacrifice, and he was just approved in February, and we hope in September we'll be able to collect his medal. They say it's kind of sketchy, like the nearest embassy or consulate. Well, the nearest consulate to us is Philadelphia, and I've emailed and I haven't heard back yet, but at some point we'll figure this thing out. It's my hope we can get it in Philadelphia because I want to take my aunt. I want to
Yes.
I want her to be there. I want them to hand her father's medal.
Absolutely. I mean, I can't imagine the closure you gave her when
Yeah.
you showed her his tombstone there. She finally knew where her dad was. You know,
It's just crazy to think about that, right? And
yeah,
my biggest regret is that my Aunt Teresa wasn't alive to see it, and I didn't do it then, and I could have. Like I regret that. I mean, look, it doesn't keep me up at night, but I
right.
just
Yeah.
regret that my Aunt Teresa did not get this did not get to see that because she was always so interested in where he was, and it
It's
just popped
it's
in my head one day. Like I wanted to find out about my family, and then it became a search for my grandfather. It didn't start out that way.
yeah. But it's one of
And
those things where it's one of those moments in life where you couldn't predict how poignant and meaningful it was until the moment happened.
well
It's almost
said.
you didn't know what you were going for until you were there.
I just thought I was trying to trace my family history.
Exactly.
I
Exactly.
found a lot of information, and so this summer I'm going to visit the house where my grandmother and my two aunts and my father lived while they waited for my grandfather to come home. And
Wow.
my aunt told me the story about the last time he was home and spent a weekend with them. And he walked up toward the train station, and they were all up on the balcony waving and screaming to him, and he turned around and waved to them, and then he turned back around and walked away, and they never saw him again. And um for 2 years, almost every day, my aunt Anna Maria went to the train station to see if he was home.
Mm. It's such a different life. It's a life that none of us can even imagine. Just that there's no security, there's everything is unpredictable, it's based in trauma, and there's no foundation to stand on, and you're just waiting for your life to be able to start again. And then
It's
when
in
he dies, it
right.
never started again. So you're just left with that emptiness.
Oh, and she was a kid too.
Yeah, so
Yeah.
it's just to have that unsettled feeling. Like again, when you showed your aunt where he's buried, there's probably a part inside of her, that emptiness that finally was settled. She could
Right.
finally find peace there. It was
It
such a
was
Or at
good,
least answers,
yeah,
it was
conclusion.
a really
yeah,
big moment. We were able to get his, I was able to, I've written so many letters electronically. And again, the internet made it so much easier now. I was able to get his full military record, which we never had. We've applied for medals, finally got the country to send a certificate acknowledging his service and sacrifice, and now the medal. And I hope at the medal, I hope I can put that in my aunt's hands. And then I think that closes the chapter.
yeah. That's a wonderful thing. I hope
What
so
a nice
too.
gift for her. Jeez.
Yeah, no, it's
Yeah.
amazing. Absolutely amazing.
Hey,
Okay, so
she's very thick, speaks very thick Italian, and she go, okay, but you keep the medal, you're the oldest grandson of my son, of my brothers being my father. And
yeah,
so
yeah.
you're the son of the boy, so you should keep the medal. I'm like, Aunt Anna Maria, you can hold on to the medal. I'll get it someday.
Yeah,
Yes.
hopefully that becomes a problem, right? You've got the
Yeah, it's
medal
a
Yes.
great
and
That's a
problem.
sort
good
it out.
problem.
Yeah.
That's a good problem. Okay, so that's your father's history. What
Yes.
about your mother's side? They basically was at work in the steel industry?
So they do. I'm three-quarter Italian. So my my maternal grandfather, was born in America, first generation. His parents came from Italy. Okay, so his parents came from Italy. In fact, my paternal grandmother, paternal grandfather, and maternal grandfather's family all lived within 20 miles from each other in the Calabria region and never knew each other.
That's
And they
crazy.
all end up in the Harrisburg, Pennsylvania area, where my so they were the Falcones. So my name's La Torre. Uh, my mother's maiden name was Falcone. Um, my maternal grandmother's family, if I'm explaining all this right, they came long time from America. They came from the South. the next name in the family line there is Leiter. And so they were in Virginia and West Virginia, made their way toward the Steelton area. And that is where my grandfather, who was born in 1913 in America, first generation, he met my grandmother in Steelton, and they married during World War II. And they couldn't go on a honeymoon because of the war, but they spent their honeymoon weekend at the Hotel Hershey.
Oh, there you go.
Yeah, cool.
It all comes back to Hershey.
It really does.
So then, do you know how your parents met?
Yeah, I'm laughing because it was a summer party in Harrisburg, Pennsylvania, and my mother was under curfew from my grandparents. She had to get back to Steelton. She had to be home by 10 a.m. She had her sweater in a closet. She opened the closet, and there's a boy in the closet making out with a girl. He hands her the sweater, and that was my father.
It's quite an impression.
Yeah, and then like a couple weeks later, they were all at a drive-in restaurant, kind of like a la Happy Days. You drive up with your car, and it was a really big thing here back in the day in Harrisburg, called Barbecue Cottage. They serve barbecue sandwiches, and they met and they saw each other and said hi, and pretty much what I'm told is we're inseparable since from that point on.
Do you know how old they were?
That would have been my dad would have been about 25 and my mother 21. They ended up marrying in 1968. So another couple years they would get married, 1968. So my father was 26 because when I was born, I always remember him saying he was 28 when I was born. So he was 28. My mother was about 24 and a half when I was born in 1970.
What did your dad, did they both work?
My mother went straight to work out of high school back in those days. It was very common to not go to college in central Pennsylvania, coming from a steel town like that. Family just didn't have enough money to send kids to college.
Yeah.
So he went to work. My grandfather, or my father, he was spoiled. He was spoiled by my grandmother. I think she just felt so guilty that he didn't grow up with a father. And my aunts, his older sisters, spoiled him. That's a very cultural thing I found, at least with my Italian family, are the sons get spoiled.
Yeah.
The sons get spoiled, especially if something has happened. So I think my grandmother, my nanny, always felt guilty about him not having his father. So whatever he won, he got. He didn't have to work. He drove an MG around. He convinced my Aunt Anna Maria to buy an MG, and then he drove it.
Awesome.
He's kind of like a spoiled kid, and ended up getting an associate's degree from York College, a bachelor's degree from Salem College in West Virginia. Their wedding announcement said that he was in a management level. He was a management level trainee for, I can't remember the company, but what I remember early on is that he sold business forms, which I found very fascinating. This is pre-computer.
Mhm.
So you can design anything you want online now with any sort of program, and you print it out. Well, back then you designed forms by hand. You had a ruler,
Yeah.
and you had special paper, and he would design receipts and invoices, and then you go out and you try and get clients who need these things, and he was really good at it. And one of my memories of childhood was that he had these what were called Chairman's Club steins on his bedroom dresser. Chairman's Club, which means you achieve a certain high level in sales. It
Yeah.
usually came with like a trip to Boca Raton or something like that for you and your wife for 3 days. And so he was very good at it. He was a very good salesman. My father is probably the smartest person I've ever known, and I'd like to think I've known quite a few smarter people in my day. But he was, but he always wanted to be his own boss, and it would ultimately, I think, become his undoing in life.
I'm assuming he was very charismatic.
Extremely charismatic. But he kind of let himself go once I was born, if that makes sense. Very extremely good looking dude. Growing up, very, very prep before there was ever really a prep sort of designation. Driving that MG around with my mother, who was beautiful. They were a couple for sure. They were a to be seen couple. But then after I was born, I think the the waist size started to increase and the hair started to thin out a little bit. But my dad was always very charismatic. Could pick up a phone and talk to anybody and convince them of anything.
What did your mom do? You said she worked. What did she do?
Well, different jobs. Receptionist at the
Mm.
states, the seat of state governments here. So it's sort of things like that.
Yeah.
Nothing really career focused per se. Like I want to be this or that. She just got a job and worked hard.
Is there a large Italian community in Harrisburg?
Um, we keep coming back to this. Mostly Hershey.
Okay.
Hershey, very large Italian community in Hershey. But we have a good side. We had a good number of Italians here in Harrisburg, and still do.
What was the draw originally? Was it working for Hershey or the steel mills?
Well, I think it was both, quite frankly, but more the steel mill than
Hmm.
anything. Steelton has produced countless judges, uh, elected officials. I mean, everybody who's ever come out of central Pennsylvania politics can trace their lineage back to Steelton because
Mm.
it was such a diverse community of so many countries, so many people with different
Yeah, yeah.
nationalities would come to Steelton to work in that steel mill. Ironically, my grandfather never worked in a steel mill. Who was born in Steelton. He was a mechanic by trade.
Mm.
So actually never worked in the steel mill, but all my grandmother's brothers worked in the steel mill. My grandfather's brothers all worked in the steel mill. He was the only one that did not.
When your
Interesting.
grandmother came over here from Italy with your two aunts, and you said it was because there was family. So she had the American side of her family was still living in that area. That's
The
why.
Magnellis, yeah, plenty of them here. And she worked as a seamstress her entire life.
That's what I
She
was going to
developed,
ask you. What did she do?
yeah, she developed her own business. Some of my earliest memories growing up when we would have to stay at her apartment during the day because parents are working, and back then there wasn't, you stayed with family. That's just the way it was.
Yeah.
um, People coming in and out all day for alterations,
Okay.
all day long. And I could still see her in her little room in the back, somebody standing up on a box while she's, adjusting where the hemline should be, and how to shorten a jacket. I can still see all those things, and then watching her pound away on the sewing machine.
No, she
That's
probably
cool.
worked so
Mm.
hard
Yeah.
when she came over here.
She raised 3 kids
Yeah.
all by herself,
Yeah. And you said
as far as I know.
she didn't remarry. Like she had one
Never remarried.
focus,
Nope, that was
working and
it.
raising those 3 kids.
And
That's
my
really impressive.
and my aunts did what you did back then too, is they got state jobs and they worked those state jobs for 35, 40 years. And back then when you retired, you were retired with full medical benefits.
Yeah. Yeah.
It was no pay, nothing, no co-pays, anything. And that's what you aspired to do back in those days. And they certainly did that. And everybody lived good lives.
Well, listen, now those jobs would be gold. If anyone could
Right.
land a job where you get a pension or anything, medical
Right.
benefits, like there was a time that might have been looked at like, oh, that's so boring. You're just doing an office job. What are you doing wasting your life for this?
Right.
Like, this is
Right.
actually the gold
Well, it's the
that nobody
best,
realized until they were gone.
probably the best gig in town in Harrisburg. There's not a whole lot around there.
There's no question.
Yeah.
Those were very, very plum gigs with and honestly, their retirement packages and health benefits in state government are still very, very good. They're
Yeah. Yeah.
very,
Government
very good.
for
I
sure.
mean, yeah, I mean, look, they're union jobs, and especially when you have Democratic governors in office, they take care of you really well.
Yeah,
Yeah.
absolutely. So your parents get married, and
Yes,
are you the oldest?
I'm the oldest. I have a sister who's 3.5 years younger than me. She
Okay.
lives in the Chicago area.
Okay, so still Gen X. She's Gen X too.
She's very Gen X. Yeah, we're proud
Okay,
of our Gen X
so
lineage.
you're born, and your dad's working. Did your mom become a stay-at-home mom after you were born?
For the most part, yeah. And we lived in upper side of the city of Harrisburg,
Okay.
in an area called Allison Hill, and I can still see that red brick two-story house with a small yard. And I drove by it not too long ago, and there was the fence that my grandfather uh, had installed so I could play in the yard. And they were worried about me getting hit by a car, and that fence is still there.
That is so
Uh,
cool.
yeah, um, and then we moved to up to Dauphin when I was 4 years old, and Stella's my daughter.
Mhm.
Uh, Caroline, my younger sister, she was just a little over 1.
Okay, and then did you guys stay in that area pretty much through your childhood?
Through until I left for college.
So, growing up in Dolphin, because you said that when your parents were working, or when your or your dad was working, you would go to your grandmother's. So, did you not have
Right.
that typical Gen X latchkey kid experience because you had the family around?
Oh no, we had lots of that.
Okay.
I can still hear my mother yelling my name. It's time to come home, because the one light we had in the street went on. You left the house during the day if your chores were done, and we probably didn't they didn't see us until nighttime unless we came home for lunch. And she yelled for us when it was time for dinner. It was very latchkey. In
Okay.
fact, in fact, I would argue that my parents were way too latchkey, as it would turn out. And um, as we go on in life, I became more the adult in the house than anything.
Okay. So they were definitely the commercial of it's 10 o'clock. Do you know where your children are?
So true.
Parents.
Yes.
Did you kind of have a group that you would bike around with, like a group of friends, a little
Yeah, just
gang?
like everybody else. Everybody had a Huffy bike,
Yeah.
with a big
So
pad.
true.
The banana seats were gone; they were out. Some kids still had them, but like, there was no way in hell I was getting one of those. They had just come out with a so-called Huffy dirt bike, and it had just sort of like a round, sort of like a round pad as a seat, black pad. And it had like the little number plate like it was a motorcycle, that sort of cheesy stuff. And yeah, you rode your bike around all day long. You played war,
Yeah.
you played football, anything you could just to kind of pass the time for the day. And the summers used to go so slow. But we'd go to the dolphin pool. But talk about latchkey. So I'm like 6 or 7 years old, and my sister's 3, and we would go to the pool by ourselves on our. I want to say now. I want to say, Caroline could ride a bike by then, so it was like 5 and 9. Let me back step. 5 and 9, like we'd ride our bikes a mile to the pool, cross a busy road, and go to the pool,
That's
and
awesome.
by ourselves. But one day I hear, Dave La Torre, please come to the office. Please come to the office. Usually you're in trouble. And like, so I'm running up to the pool office, and everybody's making fun of me because everybody thinks I'm in trouble. I think I'm in trouble. I have no idea what I did.
Yeah.
And the pool manager comes over and introduces himself. He goes, where's your mother or father? And I'm like, my dad's working and my mom's at home. And he goes, well, what's your home phone number? I said, why? He said, well, I'm going to call your mother. You guys shouldn't be here at this age. And I go, I don't think you want to call my mom. And he goes, well, young man, I'm going to be calling your mom. What's your phone number? Dials the phone number. Hi, Mrs. La Torre. This is John. Well, I can't remember his name. Like to know, your kids are here at the pool by themselves. Are you coming down to the pool? And I hear he's nodding. He goes, okay. He goes, well, we really can't have them here by themselves. It's against our rules, and it's not appropriate. And then I just see him hold the phone away from his ear, and I can hear my mother screaming at him. And he just looks over at me. I go, I go, I'm sorry. And he goes, you don't have to be sorry. I go, no, I'm sorry. She's always like this when she has her period.
Oh my
I
gosh.
s-
Oh my
Oh my
gosh.
and
god.
he was drinking a soda and had ice in his mouth and spit the ice across the room when I
Oh
said
my
that. I
god.
was a little kid. I didn't know.
Uh,
Like
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
and my mom. Look, we have a lot of. I've got a lot of trauma from childhood, and those times of the month were really bad for us. It was really bad. And I remember being happy I was at the pool because I knew she was home and she was she was just crazy, for lack of a better term.
How did
Uh,
you know she was on her period? Did she tell you guys?
she would always scream about being on her period. It was her
Okay.
period, and you start to match things up.
mm,
And
Yeah.
back then you took a nerve pill for everything.
Yeah.
Um, you know, uh, this is Burt Reynolds' movie where he's afraid of commitment. I can't think of the name right now. And
I know what you're talking about. I
yeah,
can't
Charles
either.
Charles Durning, I think, played his brother, and Burt Reynolds is having a panic attack because they're looking at buying He's looking at buying mattresses with his girlfriend, and Charles Durning turns around. There's a crowd watching, and they're all holding big brown bags. Remember, it was called Big Brown Bag,
Yes.
and they're all holding
the
these.
That's
Macy's.
no, Bloomingdale's.
Bloomies?
Yeah,
Bloomingdale's is big
Mm.
big brown bag, yeah.
yeah, and he goes, "Does anybody have a Valium?" And they all reach in their bags and pull out bottles of
Oh
pills.
yeah. Oh yeah.
And so like that's just how it was back then. So
Yep.
she would have really bad monthly cycles, and she would be taking pills to deal with it, and it made her flip out. Like it was a scary time at the house for us. Really,
Yeah,
really scary
because
time.
back then there was no discussion about premenstrual syndrome, and now there's
Right.
even it's like PM something D. It's like even more severe where you actually women experience actual clinical depression during that month.
Oh, I
Like
would come home
hardcore.
I'd come home from school, and would never know what mother I was getting. And my
Yeah.
father's out working, he's a salesman, but you're just praying that he comes home, and because you didn't know what you're going to get. And if I stepped out of line just in the slightest way accidentally when I got home, man, she just laid into us, man. And sometimes it would get violent.
So was it just during that time of the month for her?
It's really hard to say because I was young, honestly. If I told you yes, I don't know that I'm being truthful because it all blends together after all these years. You just remember so many bad moments.
So when
My mother was a kind soul, but very troubled, and she fed those issues with drugs and alcohol, and would eventually become a pill addict, an alcoholic, and a hard drug user.
do you think she started self-medicating even before you and your sister were born, or was
Without question. Without question. It was not, and back then too, pills were all about weight loss
yes.
because it was a different kind of time. And my grandmother, again, another lovely person, had no problems telling my mother she was putting on weight. You're
Right.
putting on weight. You look fat. I can still hear it. You look fat. And what that must do to a person.
Oh,
And
yes.
my mother was so impressionable and so intimidated by her parents, like, which is a mother. That's a mother I knew. I would come to find out that my mother was actually pretty crafty growing up, would steal cigarettes and hide them and smoke them with her friends, and actually put on weight after her and my father got engaged, but not a lot, but enough that it made her wedding dress too tight to adjust.
Mm.
And she convinced my grandmother that she had not bought the dress, and my grandmother went down with her to the store and bought her a second wedding dress. My grandmother never found out that she paid for two wedding dresses because that's
Wow.
how crafty my mother was. But I didn't know that, mom. I didn't know that. The mom I knew was very weak and frail, and I think the drugs had started to take hold of her, not the alcohol yet. So she's taken drugs to lose weight. She's taken Valium and Quaaludes, and I remember Quaaludes,
Yeah.
which have now been outlawed. Uh,
Right.
think of the stuff we used to put in our bodies
Oh
back
yeah.
then.
Oh yeah.
Um,
But this was during I'm picturing what, early mid 60s when she was going through this, right?
no, I was born in 1970.
But before you guys were born. So this was
Yeah,
in the
that would be
early
mid
Of this
60s, mid
early
to late
time frame.
70s,
60s. Yep.
Yeah.
yeah, when your mom, when
Yeah.
she was doing the diet pills and she was doing
Yeah,
before.
absolutely.
Yeah, okay. And so
I
do
have a
you,
question real quick.
okay.
The part of Harrisburg you lived in, is it kind of on the city grid? So if there's chaos going
Yes.
on, the neighbors heard and
Everybody would hear everything. But in all honesty, for me, I don't remember a lot from when we lived in the city because we moved when I was 4.
To
I just
Dolphin.
remember driving my big wheel up the street to stop at my Italian grandmother's who lived at the end of the block to get little pizzetta Italian cookies that she would make. I
so it was a
remember
little more rural then.
Was Dolphin more rural?
Dolphin was, I didn't understand the day we moved to Dolphin. I didn't understand why I couldn't have a big wheel. They're like, you won't need it anymore. We don't have sidewalks where we're going. And I didn't
Mm.
understand that. And then when we got there, I thought, this is the greatest thing ever. It was like 3/4 of an acre, a rancher house, one level rancher house, 3 bedrooms, 2 full baths. And I thought, this is the greatest thing ever. And I can run forever in this yard. We had a Schnauzer and we'd just race around the house.
Well, it makes sense, the Huffy bike too, right? You could just
Oh,
rent
yeah, you
that
just
Oh
bike
yeah.
bike everywhere.
everywhere.
Yeah.
So do you think, have you been able to pinpoint, or do you have any idea as to did something happen in her childhood that would have uh where her demons rooted, that would have come
Right.
up? Or do you
I
think this truly just started with diet pills?
I think it really started with diet pills and then it all just sort of exploded when she's home by herself as a mother, and I think she probably had postpartum depression. We sort of speculate that was never treated. Um and I think things just sort of spiraled for her, and it was a perfect concoction of um madness when you think about it, because my father was a pot smoker, so they smoked pot a lot. In fact, there isn't a moment in my childhood where I don't remember pot or the smell of pot. And in those early days that I remember being 5 or 6, going to being allowed to stay at a Friday night party my parents would host at the house, and my mother's like, you're gonna stay tonight. Your sister's going to your grandparents, but you're going to stay because a friend of ours, I didn't know his name, Jay, is going to come and cut your hair. He cuts hair, and he's going to cut your hair tonight. So I'm sitting in this party through wet hair stranded down, and he's cutting my hair. I've got that sort of mop top
Mm-hmm.
70s thing going, and he's cutting through, and I'm watching this party. And that's when I first started. No, first of all, I felt like it was really cool that I was there. I was the only kid there, and
Yes.
I had to be a big kid to be there. And I'm watching everybody laugh and have fun. Uh, I eventually learned how to play backgammon that night. Such a 70s board game,
Yes.
Mm-hmm.
backgammon.
Yep.
Taught me how to play backgammon that night. I'm watching my dad roll joints, which I didn't know what they were at the time. Then I watched them put what looked like sugar on a table and snort it through a straw. And that's when I start going, this just looks like so much fun. Like, this is awesome. And everybody's happy and they're blowing off steam, drinking Lowenbrow, drinking
Hmm.
St. Pauli girl beers and old Heineken, green cans. I'm sorry, green bottles. And I'm just thinking, this is just really cool. My parents have the nicest friends, and not wanting to go to bed that night.
Of course not.
But yeah, but then that was kind of like the beginning of, my parents really kind of falling off a cliff, so to speak.
Would they host these parties on the weekends, like, or would they do
Yes,
this on school nights?
always, mostly Fridays.
Okay.
They'd have a Friday party, and our driveway would be filled.
Because when you were talking about your mom kind of spiraling and she was home, in Dolphin, in a rural area, she'd moved from a more urban area. And I was picturing maybe she didn't have friends. She didn't have anyone to talk to. She didn't have girlfriends or whatever to,
That's part of it.
but she had these party friends. But
Hmm.
Probably the dad's
that's one
friends.
type of relationship. But she probably didn't have maybe female friends that she could connect
She
with.
would have friends come from outside of Dauphin, and some relatives come. I had started school. I was in kindergarten, but my sister would tell me years later, yeah, mom would have such and such and such and such over who I knew, and they would make her stay in her room, and they would smoke pot all afternoon.
Okay, so even then there were still substances involved.
Yeah, absolutely.
So I have a feeling you're probably dead on about the postpartum depression because it sounds like her cycle also triggered severe
Yeah,
depression. And back then that was not acknowledged for women in
it
any way,
wasn't.
shape, or form.
It wasn't. And if you complain, you're just being a pain in the ass.
Yeah, there was no
And
space
just,
for it.
hey, listen. And I don't know that my father ever had this conversation. I'm speaking about society in general. Hey,
Yeah,
I'm working all day, and all you have to do is stay home. We've grown in this country to realize the hardest job there is to be a stay-at-home parent. It's the hardest job there is. I don't care what anybody says. Uh, Maybe outside of school teachers, I don't know how they do it with 20 kids, like
Yeah.
20,
yeah,
25
Yeah.
kids. Like, I mean, I can't, I've got two kids, 12 years apart, and both of them were very challenging. So, in a good way, like, no complaints. I've got great kids.
of course.
I hope they agree. I hope they say the same thing about me. But, back then, it was just shut up.
Yep.
Shut
Yep.
up. Like, what do you need? You're home all day. You get to watch your soaps all day. I can imagine there was a lot of loneliness back then, a lot of frustration, a lot of why do I feel this way? And just
Absolutely.
it's sad,
No, it is. And feeling crazy. Women were called crazy left and right for anything, any
right?
indiscretion, any type of expression. So the mother's little helper concept of the pills was just give her a
Right.
pill, shut her up. Just give her this, shut her up.
Well
And
said.
so, that's probably, I would guess,
Well,
kind of what happened in the beginning for your mom was it was more just
I agree.
shushing her with substances because there was no space in society to acknowledge what was really going on there.
isn't that period of time too where women were starting to get heavily marketed to around you can do everything?
Well, that
So it puts
started,
a little bit
yeah.
of additional pressure on the stay-at-home
That was
moms.
more like late 70s into the early
Yep.
80s. But yeah, then it's like you can do it all. You can be perfect, you can be thin, you can raise perfect children, you can work outside the home and make money.
Remember those Angelique commercials?
Oh
I can
yeah.
bring
Yeah.
home the
Yeah.
bacon,
Oh
fry it up
yeah.
in a pan, never
That's
let
what
you
I'm
forget
thinking
you're a
of. Yeah.
man. Can
Yeah.
you imagine a commercial like that today?
Such a crock of shit.
It'd be
It's
awesome if just as a pun or
it's such a
something.
crock of shit. It's like
So
you
true.
now women need to do everything you're already doing, but also now go make money. But no one acknowledged, okay, men, you also need to help on the domestic front. So
Right?
nothing changed there. It was just like double your work, but they
So
sold
true.
it to us as self worth.
So true.
It's so true. Okay, so during your elementary years, you've got
Hmm.
this life going on where there's this 70s
Yeah.
world of partying and substance use, but in school, were you able to create kind of more of a normal life for yourself with athletics or art or clubs or did you
I was just a normal kid
okay.
who loved the Pittsburgh Steelers. Growing up in Pennsylvania, wanted to be Terry Bradshaw. Um, play kickball with my buddies, little league baseball. After we'd win a game, coach would pile us in the back of his pickup and take us to the ice cream place, and we'd all get ice cream cones. Imagine putting kids in the back of a flatbed truck
Yeah.
now and
Yeah.
screaming down a highway, right? I mean, that not Gen X? If that's not Gen X, I don't know what is. So yeah, I
Especially
mean,
throw in
it,
he's smoking a cigarette.
Yeah.
right. It's so true. And the smoke's coming back. It feeds its way through the back of the cab and then out past you. And
Yeah,
I just remember being in fifth grade, and it kind of like, it kind of struck me right there in fifth grade. I'm sitting in class, and I finish a quiz, and I start looking at kids all around the room. And I don't know why, but I remember thinking, I wish I had their house. I wish I like, and all these years later, all every one of their families was probably screwed up in some way, like,
Yeah.
back then. But back then I thought I was the only one who had a family that was really messed up because, my dad starts, my mother's doing what she's doing, and then my dad starts smoking a lot of pot. I could probably roll a joint uh, blindfolded, but I've never rolled one because
Mm.
I watched him roll hundreds, if not thousands, of joints. And you can never roll one. You've got to roll two because you never know when you need another one. And so I used to watch that all the time. But then the drugs got more, and there was more cocaine in the house, and the party started getting harder and harder. And then he figures out early on that the problem with my father is he wanted to be his own boss, but he really didn't know how to do it. Subsequently just sort of looked into his past a lot, interviewed a lot of his friends, and he was always like trying to get rich quick, or where he sold ads for a travel magazine that he wanted to do. Then he was a carpet cleaner on the side. He would clean oriental rugs, and he had a partner in that. So he kept going through all these ways to try and make extra money while he was being a successful salesman. If he had just really focused on that job, he could have been so successful. I mean, we could have had that American dream as a family, which, the first step was moving out of the city into the suburbs. It's our American dream, and we've got real potential here. But I think he realized I could start selling drugs,
I
and
was
he
going to
started
Mm.
ask you
selling.
that if that's because coke
Yeah.
back then wasn't the most common thing, especially in the
No.
family unit, right? You
Well,
have to
I
sell it.
remember him selling, Brian. I remember him selling pot first,
Mm.
and they would have trash bags full of marijuana.
Hmm.
He had a partner, trash bags full of marijuana, and but then he realized he could sell cocaine, and all of a sudden we don't need trash bags anymore. You can just have a little baggie and make 5 times as much in
Yeah.
one little baggie than you were with a trash bag of pot. That somewhere along those lines. I don't know what the exact economics were at the time off the top of my head, but and he became a go-to guy in Harrisburg for buying coke, and that continued for a number of years. So he's out at all hours. Problem with my dad is, and a problem with I think a lot of drug dealers is they use it as much as they sell it.
Yeah.
And so my dad developed a big problem. He was out all the time. My mom's home depressed, alcoholic. By this point, money, no matter how much drugs they sold, money was always a problem.
Yeah.
Um, and because I think my father snorted away more than he sold, and eventually gets fired from his business form job.
Oh.
And he had decided without telling anybody that he was going to open an antique shop. Now, he had shown an interest in antiques, and he really was fascinated by them. And when I said like he's like the smartest guy I ever met, he decides he's going to learn everything about antiques. And our bookshelf, what you call family room, we called the playroom, and I've never known another family who called their family room playroom in the history of my life. So
Yeah.
when I say like on the shelf in our playroom, that was our family room. I don't know why we called it the playroom. And was all these books on antiques, and he read everyone cover to cover, and he could tell me anything. He could look at something and tell you exactly when it was made, how much it's worth, blah 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 blah. And he starts collecting them. And then the day he's fired, my mother calls back to his office and, "You're gonna regret when you fired my husband. How dare you? He's meant so much to your company, blah 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 blah." She hung up. He's like, "They're right." And she's like, "What do you mean they're right?" He goes, I wasn't focused on it anymore. It was time, like, I want to open an antique shop. And I remember my mother going, "You want what? You want to open an antique?" He's like, "And I already have a place." She's like, "You what?" And there was a little shop in downtown Harrisburg where a clog shop was located. They sold clogs.
Logs.
Yeah. It was a clog shop, and it had a big clog painted on the window. And clogs had ended their run,
Yeah.
and it was time for the clog shop to go. And my father was going to rent this out, and he turned it in about 10 months. He opened what was called Old Town Antiques, OLDE, town with an E as well, antiques. And there's just one problem with antiques and opening a shop in the city in December of 1981. There's a problem with that. He decided to open a shop in a city where all the retail had moved out 5 years earlier to this new thing called malls in suburbia. And not only was he in the city where nobody was going to buy retail, but he was selling a product nobody needed, right? Like,
Yeah.
even everybody needs shoes, maybe not
Yeah.
clogs, but somebody's going to buy shoes, right?
Yeah.
Well, he decides he's going to open an antique shop in the middle of a city where nobody shops. And so now he's got rent and a business, and you've got to buy and buy and buy. So he's
Yeah.
selling drugs to really kind of run everything through the antique shops. You might say he was maybe laundering a little money. I wouldn't argue with you, but he's got to buy more antiques to sell the antiques, and he's got to sell more drugs. All of a sudden, he's selling drugs out of the antique shop. And that's when the police first found out really who he was.
This is so interesting. I'm just going back to how you said he had all these side jobs in addition to his main job. And he was
Yeah,
always starting these jobs and then getting
right.
the interest in the antiques and reading all the books. Do you think he had ADHD?
Yes,
Because
without question.
that sounds like ADHD to me.
I
And
think I
also
have, I don't know that I have ADHD, but I think I've got a little ADD. It was
something
always very
like some
hard for
ADD.
me to focus. I've gotten a lot better at it as I've gotten older.
Yeah.
That's for sure.
But that
Um,
dopamine hit of the new thing, the new thing, the new
yes.
thing, and that aligns with the drug use too, right? And
Yep.
then the dopamine hit from selling drugs. And so and then jumping into the antique store, but without the forethought of this isn't the right location. This isn't,
Nothing.
it just
When I
like
tell you
going
so
for it.
smart,
Yeah.
how
Yeah,
smart he was, that was so dumb.
right.
So dumb.
But it
So
was
we got,
that hit, right?
oh
That
yeah.
let's go for it,
Oh yeah, oh yeah, and so we'd spend our weekends at antique shows and flea markets, and let me tell you, that's
Yeah.
everything a young boy wants to do. I mean,
In
oh,
Harrisburg area.
I mean,
Not to pick
well,
on your area, but it's I feel like if I wanted to buy antiques, I'd go to
yeah.
Harrisburg because it feels like you could probably
Well,
Yeah.
have your pick of the litter.
Yeah.
Lancaster fashions itself as the antique capital of America. So
Yeah.
you had lots of antique shows you could go
Yeah,
to in central Pennsylvania and make money. He never should have opened a shop. It was just very different back then. He should have just traveled show to show
yeah.
and,
Yeah.
when possible, did private sales. But having that shop in Center City really destroyed our finances.
So when did this how old were you first of all when your mom became an alcoholic, would you say?
After the store opened, so I'm about 12 years old.
Okay. And then so up until that point he was working as a salesman, working all the
Hmm.
side jobs. They're having the party still only on Fridays?
Mostly Fridays. I remember some Saturdays. I remember one time my mom saying, "Do you want to stay up and watch Saturday Night Live?" I'm
Mm,
like, "Why would I want to watch John Travolta? Like that didn't make sense to me." I thought
yeah.
she was talking about Saturday Night Fever. I had
Yeah.
no idea what Saturday Night
Yeah.
Live was. And but I did, and because I thought it was cool to stay up with my family. But I could start to see what was going on too, and
Even then. Now did anyone ever try to offer you anything at the parties? Or was that
no,
kind
but I remember one day getting up when I was really young and wanted to see what it was all about. And my dad had like a glass desk blotter over top of the wood desk, and that's where they would do coke lines. And so I remember getting up one day and sticking my nostril down on the glass and trying to snort off the glass. And I didn't feel anything. And then I sort of hunkered down a little bit more. And then I thought I saw what I thought might have been cocaine, and maybe it wasn't, and I remember feeling like a little bit of a burn, but I remember thinking like, that's it. Like, that's all this is.
Right.
Like it's nothing. And listen, I don't know if I snorted anything, but
Right.
at that time I was looking for like trying to be like my parents. I wanted to be
Yeah.
like my dad. And so I didn't know any better. And I remember, New Year's Eve, 1978. Every New Year's, we'd go to our grandparents and be in bed by 9, and I'd be all pissed off about that. But now they were inviting me out to dinner with another couple, a couple who the man ended up being a new drug partner for my father, bankrolling cocaine sales. And we're out at this great restaurant called Lombardo's in downtown Harrisburg. It's lit up at night. They have the whole building's glass and the elevator is outlined in light bulbs, and I can remember watching it go up and down. uh, we walked right past the Gazebo Room restaurant. I don't know if you know Gazebo Room salad dressing, but it was created in Harrisburg at the Gazebo Room restaurant,
Oh, cool.
sold nationally, and walked past that into this place. And that's the night I had my first filet mignon,
Mm.
and I just thought like, life cannot get any better than this. And so my mother and uh, the other woman get up to go to the bathroom, to use the restroom, and my father's partner turns to me and says, "Hey, David, know you're at the parties at the house and you see what's going on." And I go, "Yeah." He goes, "Do you ever talk about it with your friends?" And I thought that was odd. And I go, "No, why?" He goes, "Well, that's good. That's good." He goes, like, "Do me a favor, like whenever you talk about it, whenever we talk about it, I want you to call it soda." And I remember thinking at the time, okay, yeah, that's fine. I'll call it soda. He didn't want me to say cocaine.
Mm.
Didn't want me to say Coke. He wanted me to call it soda. And now I look back and I think how fucked up that whole story, that whole exchange was.
Yeah.
Like you're telling it at the time I was 8 years old.
Yeah.
New
Yep.
Year's Eve, 1978. I'm up late. I'm gonna get to go home and watch Dick Clark for the first time in the Apple Lower in Times Square, and this fucking guy's telling me to call cocaine soda.
Yeah.
Like,
Why? That's such an odd thing. In Pennsylvania, you probably called things pop, right? Soda was pop.
no, pop was Western PA. I called it
Okay.
soda.
So you
Yeah,
were on the
that's.
line then,
Okay.
probably.
I
Okay.
was right on the line. All my buddies from Pittsburgh that I met in college, to this day, they'll call it pop.
Yeah.
They'll stop at the beer and pop warehouse in Harrisburg. You stop at the beer and soda warehouse.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
That's so yeah, that's a crazy story.
Yeah.
That's
It's
fucking
interesting,
nuts,
especially
really.
once you become
Yeah.
a parent. And I'm sure with your older son, when he turned around that age, did you ever reflect like this was the age I was when this guy had this conversation with me?
No, because I didn't think about it for years.
Okay.
I I've recently written a book
Right.
about growing up, and so I didn't think about these things. So I started writing a book again. And the book ended up being somewhat tumultuous for me in some ways, but also I think medicinal in many ways. And I decided to write it after my mother died in 2024. My father passed in 2006. I made my peace with both of my parents, got along with them years later. And but when my mother died, I remember thinking like, this is the time, like I really need to write about my childhood. But to answer your question, because I think it can be helpful to other people, like you don't have to become like your parents. And I think too many
Yeah.
people choose the road their parents choose. I had just memory hold so much of those things. Like there was never a moment where I looked at Gus and thought, oh man, to answer your question, oh man, when I was his age, I was doing such and such, or I was trying to stop my mom from killing herself, or it was
Right.
always something. But I never drew parallel paths.
And interesting.
I think,
Yeah.
uh,
I know for me, because I have trauma from my childhood, and as my children grew, that's when some things really landed for me of in different stages realizing. So
Interesting.
I went on that journey kind of along, like as they grew, it made me, that's when I would kind of really trigger back. And it became like, wow, at 6 or 7, we just left my dad's mental his apartment And now we're going to see my stepmom, and he's telling me, don't tell her that we saw her, and
Oh
don't
my
tell her.
God.
And I'm just thinking that's normal. Like, okay. And didn't really think how insane that was till my son was 6 or 7. And I was like, oh my God, that was abuse.
And all total abuse. I mean,
No.
what are you thinking? Like,
Yes.
they're
No, it's crazy. Okay, so you're saying, so it sounds like around 12 is your mom is in the throes of alcoholism.
and the only reason that happened is because they opened the antique store, by the way, so she could walk to a liquor store.
Okay.
Because she wasn't driving from Dauphin to liquor stores all the way out in Harrisburg. It
Right.
only happened because they opened the antique store, and they both worked at the antique store, and there was a liquor store around the corner where she could buy bottles of Smirnoff vodka, and she would
Okay.
drink a bottle a day.
Wow.
Yeah, a
Okay.
bottle a day.
So you're coming home from school to a latchkey. That's when you were really latchkey because they're at
It's
the
total
antique store,
latchkey.
and your
Total
sister
latchkey.
too, right? I assume.
Yeah. Yeah. Oh, yeah.
Well, what's interesting, if your dad's selling, I bet he kept your mom self-medicated with his products.
Oh, that's a great point because my dad needed my mother to be alcoholic
Yes.
because it was a crutch for him.
It's cheaper.
And I'll tell you, like I'll jump around a little bit from time to time, but she did end up going to rehab twice, 2 or 3 times in life. The first time she comes home, like I'd gone to see her in rehab, and she was a different person, and I was really hard on her when I got there, and we left on very good terms, and I was very excited for her to get home. Well, he thought, let's go celebrate at our favorite Chinese restaurant, and ordered her a glass of wine. And I just looked at him, and I was I was like 13 or 14 at that time, and I just looked at him, and my sister was next to me, and I just said, what the fuck are you doing? Like, this is really hard for her to do. What the fuck are you doing?
How old were
And
you?
You just said 13 or 14.
13,
I think
14.
13,
Okay.
14, somewhere in there.
Enough to
Okay.
know, enough to be aware.
Yeah, and she's like, honey, it's only one glass, and that was it. And she's right back on the train, and he needed her to be. He needed her to be.
Why?
Because I think in a lot of ways it justified him being who he was.
So
Quite
if she was
frankly.
healthy, it would kind of fuck with his
Yes.
mindset
Oh,
of
yeah,
not
because
being
he
healthy.
always had something
Yeah.
over her. My father was very manipulative.
Yeah.
You know, so many things I think about with my father. You know, you felt loved at the time, but now I realize that he was manipulating us to feel a certain way, and he liked to pit us against my mother, and he would get violent with my mother and blame everything on her. My father never apologized to us for anything, ever. You know, when he got arrested and they issued a search warrant on our house, I don't know if you've ever seen a house after a search warrant, but everything in each room is piled into the middle. They don't give a shit. They're there to find drugs and cash or what else they can find. Uh, I actually played in a high school football game while my house was being searched by police, and I noticed nobody was there. And bottom line is, you know, after the game, I'm at high school for 2 hours waiting for a ride, and a non-relative comes and to pick me up, and I knew something was wrong right away. And I looked in the car, and this woman was emotional, and I just opened the door and I said, Dad got arrested, didn't he? It's like I knew. But the next fucking day, I get a call that I need to go home and start cleaning the house.
From your parents?
And yeah, they're going to be out of jail today or tomorrow, and you need to go home and clean the house up.
Did they find anything that made the
Oh
charge
yeah, they found
good?
drugs, and they found drugs, and he told them where drugs were in the antique store. He had gotten really sloppy selling. He had
Back,
gotten really sloppy selling drugs.
back then, I mean, Pennsylvania's a pretty liberal state these days, but
Mm-hmm.
back then they were pretty conservative in terms of the law, I think.
Right,
But
that's
that was
fair.
probably a big fucking deal.
It was definitely a big deal when you're a football player at a local high school, and everybody reads the paper back then, and it was in the news the next day. And um, I would argue the hardest thing I've ever had to do in my life was to go to school on that Monday.
I'm sure. I'm sure.
And to this day, like I feel I feel shame about it to this day. Um, but I got to give my high school credit. Nobody said anything to me. None of the kids and none of the teachers.
That's
I was going to
wonderful.
ask you that because
About a
we,
year. Well, hold on, real quick. About
yeah,
a year before his arrest, um, our local priest told a teacher at McDevitt he thinks there's something wrong with our family, and the teacher called me into his office or into his classroom between periods, and I looked him straight in the face and said, "I have no idea what he's talking about. Everything's fine." Like I fucking lied to that teacher's face, right into his eyes, like nothing. And that teacher ended up leaving our school, so I never had to go in and see him after my father got arrested and be like, "You were right,"
Yeah.
you know. But I asked a good friend of mine years later. I'm like, "Why didn't you say anything?" And this friend said, "We didn't know what to say."
Was everyone shocked? Did no one have any idea?
No one had any idea because I was like I don't want to say a jock. I was a very average athlete, right? And I took honors classes, so I was sort of smart and um but then I fell out of honors classes because the shit was so bad at home and I'm up all night caring for my mother and like it's fucking exhausting. Um but by and large, I was a clean cut prep kid and I wore a lot of masks. You
Yeah.
learn to wear masks.
Yeah.
You learn to not show anything. And I was somewhat of a joker, class clownish type person, not total class clown, but that's how you hide your sadness
Oh,
and what you're going through by cracking jokes all day. So you never would have guessed. Like you could look at some of the kids in school who you knew do drugs and you think, oh, I would think it would be that person, that person. Nobody would ever think it was me. Nobody would ever think my parents were drug dealers, especially when everybody knew they were antiques dealers,
right.
and so nobody said anything to me. Nobody at the school, no teacher said anything. I'm still shocked about that to this day. Part of me at first was like, you know, Catholic school, so much for, being concerned about kids, and does he need any help? But I look back on it now and I'm just glad nobody said anything.
Well, I
I
think
really am.
back then though, appearances was so important. Like
Yeah.
appearances was that was everything. And so especially Catholic school, it's a weird dynamic because holding up the appearance, the school would also support that too.
Right.
So it is a weird thing because our kids went to Catholic school, so I'm very familiar with Catholic school.
Right.
Um, now it would be treated differently, but I could totally see how yes, we're here for the children, but we would like everything to stay nice and quiet and polished too. We don't really want to deal with that type of thing.
Yeah. I just remember thinking high school was over for me. Like
Yeah.
that was it, high
It's a,
school's over for me. But then I was able to, I met a girl, my really kind of my first girlfriend. I would argue my only serious girlfriend in high school. We didn't stay together through all of high school. But she's just such a great person. And, I've done a lot of thinking about life since then and recalling all those years and how lucky I was to have this girlfriend at that time to kind of make me realize that I wasn't worthless.
right. Right. Well, did you
You know?
feel because you had said that your mom was violent with you guys, or was it just you, or
So
you
was my father.
with
And
both of you, or just you?
years later, my sister told me one day she spilled something in the kitchen and my mother grabbed her by the hair and beat her head against the kitchen floor.
Mm.
And my sister never told my father or me because she didn't want to get in more trouble
But
from her mother.
was that the only incident you think for your sister?
Oh no, my mother. I was at the age where my mother couldn't hurt me anymore, but she could hurt her. She could hurt. She could hurt Caroline, and um, but Dad was always intimidating.
Did your dad was he violent with both of you, or just you?
Oh yeah, oh yeah.
Okay, so
But my dad wasn't like He was randomly violent with my mother when they would get into arguments. Um, but he would not just hit us consistently. Like, you know, basically we would misbehave or something and it would build up in him. And then finally he'd have too much. And so when he spanked us, it was like a 10 to 15-minute beating.
Right.
Like it was a beating. Like
Right.
it wasn't like, let me smack you on the ass and redirect you. Um, it was, I'm gonna beat you close fisted.
Yeah, it's not like cause and effect to learn a
Right,
lesson, steer
right. There's
behavior. It
no,
was a
yeah.
release.
It
And
was him releasing a lot of frustration. I think it had a lot more to do with the shit in his life than it did with anything that my sister or I did.
no, it's
Yeah, 100%.
displacement of anger
Yeah.
onto you guys. Absolutely.
Yeah.
Is that from your earliest memory, or was there an age when it started in particular?
It's not my earliest memory. I was in sixth grade and I brought home a report card with 4 B's and 5 C's, and my father beat the shit out of me.
Okay. All right.
How dare you bring these grades home? You need to. And I remember him backing me into a corner by our front door and just punching the shit out of me. Like, you do not bring those grades home. Yeah. Meanwhile, I'm exhausted. I'm up every night trying to stop my mother from doing God knows what. He's not home because he's out gallivanting around, selling drugs, partying, acting like he's working. It's total bullshit.
Yeah.
So he can do whatever the fuck he wants. And I bring home 4 B's and 5 C's and I get jacked up for it. And that's really kind of when it started. But like, I'm not going to sit here and tell you like there were weekly or even monthly beatings. It would be maybe once or twice a year. And then, but when it happened, man, it was big time. Like I remember him spanking my sister, and I would just run out of the room thinking, "Well, I might catch a random here, or maybe he'll just decide to start beating on me." Because it was not pleasant, man. It was they were snot knockers.
What about your mom? Was hers just once or twice a year, or was hers more regular?
Um, they got in a lot of physical altercations. Usually, when my mother said something like, "I'm gonna call the police on you,"
Okay.
or "I'm gonna leave," like then it got like him pushing her up against a wall, stuff like that. I just remember the first time it happened. Um, I remember he was cutting cocaine at the desk. You remember, not that you would remember, but back then, people to create the image they were selling more cocaine than they had would mix in certain
Yeah.
natural elements basically called cut, for lack of a better term,
Yeah.
into the cocaine. And he puts cut in the cocaine and asks my mom what she thinks, and she does a line, and she goes, "Seems fine to me." And then he does a line. He says, "It's not fine at all." And he starts freaking out, and he starts blaming her. He's the one who put the cut in.
Right.
And then he sort of jacks her up against a wall. And it was crazy. Is like I was always the one that like tried to stop it, like step in and everything, and my sister would just ignore it. Like she was really tough. Like my sister's tough, and she just tuned that shit out,
She
or just try
disassociated.
to. She just handled it differently.
Yeah, it was how she coped. She probably disassociated. I'm just
Right.
trying to think with your dad, how you talked about he was indulged, he was spoiled and all
Hmm.
that. I'm assuming he was a narcissist, it's sounding like.
I don't know that I want to designate him a narcissist because I always feel like narcissists really take care of themselves too. Like they
Mm,
want to be seen as handsome and I'm in great shape, whether it's a man or a woman. And he just really kind of let himself go, and he was very slovenly.
okay.
Let himself get out of shape, didn't wear nice clothes, didn't really get haircuts. Every once in a while he'd be dressed really nice and it would be shocking, you know.
But with the drug use, so do you think he was just like one of those people that just started smoking pot like everyone was
Yes,
doing at that
without
time?
question.
And then
Without question.
it just spiraled into this, maybe tying in with the ADHD or the dopamine hits or needing something new. It just spiraled
Without
into
question. Yeah, I mean, because then he eventually became a crack addict. It
Wow.
just became like the next drug. And then he started selling crack, but he kept doing crack. He would stay up all night for days at a time in the bedroom right next to us smoking crack, and I could hear him smoke it.
Wow.
Now, my mother in those days would sleep in the playroom on the couch. She just became a perpetual sleeper on the couch. Now, whether that was to stay away from my father, I really don't think it was. I think she liked to stay in the playroom and get drunk and have her own room because there wasn't an extra room to go to
Right.
in the house, and she would go and sleep in the playroom every night on the couch. And by the way, when I would bring bad grades home that had to be signed by the teacher, like you have to have your parents sign, I would wait until she was drunk. I figured it out. I'd wait until she was drunk. I'd wake her up and have her sign something. She would never remember it. Just
Right.
the little things you figure out that you start to take advantage of when you know your parents are fuck ups.
Well, you said that you would be up late taking care of your mom or making sure she wasn't doing something. What was it that you were trying to make sure she wasn't doing? Or what were
Not
you,
kill herself.
was she threatening that?
Yeah, because I found out we had a gun the day we came home and there were burglars in our house. Um, Me, my mom, and my dad. I don't know why my sister wasn't there. I don't know what the situation was. She was somewhere, and we came home and there was a car in our driveway. And my dad looks in the car. He goes, I don't know who these people are. And he goes in the house, and I get out of the car, and I'm 10 at this time. So I'm skipping around a little bit, and I'm sorry about that.
No, no,
Um,
you're good.
Um, and I look in and I see him rush toward the end of our living room and grab a guy and jack him up against the wall. A guy who was a lot bigger than my father. My father he was a tough son of a bitch. Um, and I go in the house and I hear my mom yell, David, don't go in there. And I go in the house and, he's got this guy up a wall. What are you doing here? And he goes, you owe my somebody hired me, you owe them $1,000 for cocaine. And he goes, I don't know what you're talking about. I don't do drugs. He goes, I don't care if you do drugs or not, man. He goes, I made a mistake. I'm out of here. Guy had uh, he had gotten some sort of basket or something in our house and was stealing stuff because he couldn't find cocaine and couldn't find this cocaine that he was looking for. Or $1,000. I mean, nobody's got $1,000 lying around their house. So he thought he was going to steal shit. I don't know whether that shit was true or not. Um, And I come in, and then my mom comes in, and my mom immediately goes into the back of the house. I'm like, I remember thinking, where the hell is she going? And she comes down, she's got a 38 in her hand. I go, Jesus Christ.
Oh,
Like, she's got a 38. Like, I was more scared of her having that gun than of that guy in the house at that moment. And he's like, listen, just let me go. You don't have it. I'm not going to be a problem. I'm going to leave. And there were other two people in the other car. They come in. One was a young woman. She was 18, and another was a guy who was asleep in the back seat, and he had a rock shirt of some concert shirt on of some sort, long hair, just looked like a fucking burnout. And I'm 10, like, and I'm fucking scared shitless. And yeah, I wish I could tell you like I was real brave and everything. But I was 10 years old going like, what the hell? Like God. And these other two people come in and the one guy's like, hey, we're gonna leave. And the woman's like, yep, we're out of here. And the other guy says, no, we're not. Fuck this. The guy who was asleep said, fuck this. He goes, let's do them. And they didn't have any weapons on them, but that fucking scared me at that
yeah.
moment. And my father goes, um, to my mom, hand me the gun. And he said, and she didn't respond. He goes, I said, fucking hand me the gun. And she hands him the gun and he drops it down to his leg and he cocks it. And that place got fucking really quiet. And, and, my dad looked at the guy who said, let's do him. And that guy's looking at me and then he looks over at my dad and he goes, hey, motherfucker, look at me right now. And the guy was sort of like, and he says, motherfucker, I said, look at me right now. And this guy turned and he said, you're going to die here right now. He said, you touch anybody, you are fucking dead. and he had that gun in his hand, and they fucking ran out of there real fast. Like they tripped and fell into the screen door, dented the screen door,
Oh my God.
and ran out. And, the crazy thing about that whole thing is my dad ran out, put the gun down, opened a drawer, got a pad and pen, and ran out. No, not a pad, just a pen, ran out and wrote their license plate down on his arm and came back in and sat down. He was just fuck. You could just see all the adrenaline starting to
Yeah.
drain out at that point. And my mom saying, "What are we going to do?" And I just remember thinking, or I remember saying, "What do you mean? What are we going to do? Call the cops?" And they didn't know what to do. I
Yeah.
mean, they literally didn't know whether they should call the cops. And then my dad called the cops. And that guy ended up going to jail for a period of time. And the other two got off because they claimed they didn't know he was breaking into the house. That he had not told them that. And um, what was interesting is when I was researching the book, to really tell the story, in the affidavit of probable cause for arresting the guy who broke into the house, they noted that he had said he was there because my father owed $1,000 for cocaine. And years later, when my father was arrested, and I had that affidavit of probable cause too, they list that. They list that.
They used
And
that?
that they used that story that guy
Oh.
told. They filed that away. I think that was the moment my dad got on their radar.
Mm-hmm.
Like,
Yes.
why would this guy randomly break into somebody's house in the middle of
Yes.
Dauphin, Pennsylvania, and claim that he owes this guy $1,000 in drugs? Like, they filed that away, and in that arrest warrant, they recalled that moment years earlier when that happened at our house, and I just thought that was really,
That's when they started the paper trail of like
yeah,
all
I
yeah,
think so.
building
I
that.
don't know
Yeah.
for sure. I
No,
don't
but
know for
that makes
sure.
sense.
Uh,
But
I inter I interviewed the two cops who arrested my parents, believe it or not,
Wow.
for my book. They don't remember like details like that. They don't remember how it all. They just remember that my dad was selling drugs out of the antique store in Harrisburg, and some of the businesses knew about it and started complaining, and they started surveillance, and they sent in some people who were informants to buy off him, and he sold to them, and they got him.
so how long had they been watching him? Do you know?
That went down pretty quickly from when they started getting complaints from the city. Like, you don't fuck around when city businesses are saying this guy's selling drugs. Like,
Yeah.
and that's what the one retired Harrisburg city detective told me. He goes, when you get a complaint like that, you start moving in pretty quickly. And they were able to develop some informants pretty quickly who knew my father, went into the shop and um, executed purchases and had two purchases. And then it was a Friday night in October of 1986. I'm playing in a football game and nobody from my family's there. And I'm like, as nutty as my parents were, like they were always at all my football games. Like there are those moments, right, of our parents. There were moments of normalcy that sort of almost betray you in a way. Like you think like this might be it, that we could be really normal at some point.
Yes.
And it was like that always sort of happened when I was playing football. Like nothing made my dad happier than I was playing football. I went to a school called Bishop McDevitt High School in Harrisburg, Pennsylvania, and we are pretty good back then. I mean, it's an amazing program now. They're multiple state champions, but we were really on the rise back then. Had some good teams. And so my old man was really into it. And when he wasn't there, and there was no reason for them not to be there. And my grandfather would always come. My maternal grandfather, my poppy, would come to every game, and he wasn't there. I'm like,
Something.
and I'm out playing in the middle of the game, and because you always look, people act like football players don't look up in the crowds. They do.
Mhm.
They do. Like we're looking at, we're hoping our girlfriend's watching us. We're looking for our parents, all that stuff.
Yeah.
And when they weren't there, like I got really distracted during that game because I fucking knew something was wrong, and I was right.
And that was the night that they got arrested.
Yeah, yeah.
So, and I was going to bring up, like, did your parents, because you had said they weren't at the game. So I thought, okay, so they must have come to they did some normal things. And
They
one of
really
them
did.
was that was your mom involved? And your school at all? Would you
No,
volunteer,
no.
do any of that stuff?
She came to one after school activity as a mother, and I always wanted my mother to do that, like the other moms did. She did it one time, and I just was so happy. Do you remember 3 Mile Island,
Yes.
1979?
Yes.
So the whole world's afraid of a nuclear accident, all of America. Well, that's happened 4 miles from where my grandparents lived, so they had to come live with us. Those 10 days were the happiest 10 days of my life. Everybody's worried about a nuclear meltdown in
Yeah.
Pennsylvania. I was happy because my grandparents were at our house and my parents couldn't act like they acted. They
Yeah.
were like the Cleavers for
Yes.
10 days.
What a trip.
Yeah, and
Wow.
when I was sad when TMI ended,
Yeah.
when the emergency ended because they left, and they as soon as they left, man, they could not light up a joint fast enough.
I bet.
And
But
by the
what?
way, everywhere we drove, joints in the car all the time, smoke like um
So like the rest of us are having talking about cigarette smoke in the car with the windows rolled up. You were dealing with pot smoke too.
all the time,
You know,
all the
so
time.
I think that's such a testament though to what was your childhood is that the nuclear fear that whatever was going on at 3 Mile Island
Right.
was one of the most positive times in your childhood. And I think
Crazy.
that just sums it up
Crazy,
right
right?
there. Oh,
And and
absolutely, yeah.
and look, I've never done any hard drugs in my life, but I have smoked pot. I freely admit that. It's quite frankly, it's legal in most states now. Anyway, it's legal in New Jersey where we have a house.
Mm-hmm.
I I cannot get high off of pot. I can't. Now it's really weird. Like I have no tolerance for alcohol. Never have, and I've never been a big drinker. Like when you see what you see when I grew up, like
Yeah.
a little bit of pot was the most I've ever done, but I really can't get high smoking pot.
I wonder if you have a tolerance from
That's what
Yeah,
I think because
definitely.
I got
yeah.
to tell you, like when when you're constantly in your car with your parents going places and all they do is smoke pot in the
Yeah.
car, like there was so much smoke all the time,
You were
all the
probably
time.
contact high a lot of your childhood without realizing
There's
it.
no question.
Yeah. What a
There's no
trip.
question. It's impossible that we weren't.
So you said that knew that your parents had a gun, and is that why you were afraid your mom was going to kill herself because she was
Yes.
threatening? She
Well,
was
no, she
constantly
would ask.
threatening.
She would start one night. She was stumbling around, going, I want the gun. I want the gun."
Okay.
And there were more than a few nights where I had to tackle her. Well, not really tackle, but
Right.
stop her. Like there was 2 steps that led out of our playroom into our living room, and I would have to like almost hold her down on those steps, really, and then just physically manipulate her and throw her onto the couch. And I remember one night her just screaming and screaming, and I just said, "If you, I'm in fucking hell, and I swear to God, I'm gonna fucking go get that gun for you."
Right.
Like, and then she sort of passes out, and man, that whole latchkey generation thing, like parents really took that shit literally. Like, they
Well,
just they didn't want to be parents in a lot of ways. They just wanted to live their lives, and I really think about my parents at that time. I think that they did the best they could, which was really bad, but they did the best they could. And I have to tell you, when I met with the police officers, one was a retired trooper and one was a retired Harrisburg police detective. The trooper went out of his way to tell me to try and put me at ease about my parents. And I just thought that was really cool. And he's like, "I just want you to know, Dave, they didn't start out trying to be addicts. They didn't try to live these lives. It happens. And, so just try and take it easy when you remember your parents. Like they didn't mean to be this way." I just thought that was incredibly touching that that's what he chose to. He obviously was very interested in how he turned out and said that, my sister and I are the exception. We both turned out pretty darn well. And, I have a line like, you have a choice in life. You don't have to be your parents.
Um,
So many people do. So many people do. And, our past is our past, I've often said, but it doesn't define our future. Um,
absolutely.
what
Abs-
and
Go ahead.
And they were very surprised. They go, "You guys are the exception. You and your sister are the exception." He goes, "If I had told you what we've seen in drug houses with little children running around in diapers," um, he goes, "It's stuff I still don't want to think about." He goes, "You guys are the exception, and you should be really proud of yourselves."
Absolutely. And
Can
I go ahead.
I'm just curious, can you attribute that to anything? Because what you've described is fucking nuts, really.
Yeah,
Something no one can really relate to for the most part.
I think having extended family around who loved us, aunts, uncles, cousins, was really important, that we felt loved, even if sometimes it was from afar. Because living in Dauphin, when we moved up there, our family also moved up across the street from us. But that only lasted a couple of years. There's a divorce between an aunt and uncle, and they moved back into Harrisburg City and different places or suburbs out that way. But they were always like places I could go on the weekend, and my grandparents as well. My grandparents were saving for our college, and they were so proud someday we're going to send you to college, and they paid for our McDevitt high school tuition. Um, and so having those people around that you know are good people and love you and tell you they love you really went a long way. Having good friends who didn't give me shit about it really went a long way. I had some good high school friends. Um, I wish we were friends today, but life gets in the way. Um, who were really supportive of me and never gave me shit about it. I talked about my high school girlfriend, there for me. I mean, um, she was really important, and came around at a time in my life when I needed to know that I wasn't shit. And so all those things, I think, culminated in me knowing that I had to get out, but I didn't know how to get out. And then eventually deciding, well, I've got to the only way to get out of here is to go to college, or, I never really thought about the military. People are like, why didn't you go in the military? Well, back then, like, we weren't in a lot of wars,
Yeah.
and it was the 80s, and you didn't do anything. And I had so many friends going to the military who told me all the time, and I'm so thankful for their service and every service member. But, more than one of them told me, like, I'm bored. And, this is so pre 9/11 and everything else. I mean, it's
Yeah.
15, 20 years before. Um, Not that they were upset they weren't going into a battle zone or anything, but
Right.
I mean, the jobs are sort of mundane.
Yeah.
And so I wanted to go to college. And so I fixated on that. And, here I am, fast forward all these years later. I'm 56 years old, and my specialty is crisis communications.
Which is just ironic, but not, because you came with all
You were trained
the
for this
skills. You were
moment.
trained for this
Right.
without knowing. But it sounds like what you're describing is you had some balance, and you had that normalcy offered by extended family,
Right.
friends, your girlfriend. They were like your anchor into reality and into normalcy, which kind of, where you didn't get lost, is what the trooper or the cop was talking about.
I
Is
think
so
that's
many
fair.
get lost, and they kind of held you. So then you had a chance to at least get through it
Right.
and then get to college. Like, get through it so you can escape. Where so many kids don't have that anchor, and they're just
Right.
swept away in the chaos and end up in the same situation. I mean, I do think that in general, a lot of us Gen X parents have worked really hard to break the generational trauma and to do different for our
Agreed.
children. So I think that's very common. And the whole, like, I definitely understand that our parents did the best they could, but we figured out how to do different.
I
And
agree.
maybe that comes from what we were put through was so traumatic for some of us that there was only that was our only choice, is to do different, because we sure as hell aren't going to repeat what we were put through. But even those, like Brian, grew up in a very fairly normal upbringing, but he's even leveled up with our kids from what he's like, I'm going to
Right.
do better, I'm going to be closer, I'm going to improve, at least with communication. So something in our generation as parents, we all kind of have
Right.
this instinct of, we're going to give our children the what we needed, we're going to be the people we needed for our children. You have 10 times more motivation than even
Right.
both of us coming. But I don't know. I just feel like that's a fairly common thing with all of us, it seems.
I think so. I think we were tougher because of circumstances like that. And, you know, I I joked a little bit earlier about Latchkey, but being more independent helped. I
Yeah.
mean, I think today, I think there's things we certainly do better as parents now, but one of the things are is we latch down too hard on our kids these days. I don't want you going down the block. Meanwhile, I would be all over,
Yeah.
when I was a kid. And maybe that's why I'm a little afraid of my daughter going here or there, for a lack of a better explanation. Um, but it forced us to grow up faster.
Yeah.
Even in the best of circumstances, it forced us to grow up faster. And I think it's natural for us to go, we don't want them to have that type of childhood. There's good things we did, but there was a lot of bad stuff. And I think growing up challenged like that in that generation, uh, it just lends itself to becoming better parents, to wanting to be better parents for our kids. I mean, Jesus, it can't get any worse than what I went through. Like it
Right.
just,
Well,
I had a low bar, by the way.
yeah.
I had a low
Yeah.
bar to,
Hey, good job.
Yeah.
yeah, thanks.
Couldn't exceed
Thank you.
No, but I think you really nailed it right there is we had to grow up fast. And so I think we've tried hard to make sure our children get a childhood. We're like,
Yes.
we are going to make sure that at least from 0 to 18, they can look back and say their childhood wasn't that bad. They got a childhood.
I think
Yes.
we're forced. We as what you're describing is next level, but as kids, we were forced. I think a collective experience for all Gen Xers is experiencing and dealing with awkward shit at a young
Yes.
age on your own, right? Whether
Yes.
it's at the pool or whatever, the weirdo, that down the
Yeah.
street that was allowed to interact with us kids because we were latchkey. So we all kind of grew up faster, got those life skills because of that weird shit.
Right.
Or
Yours is next level.
a guy telling you to call cocaine soda,
Yeah.
right? At a
Right.
nice restaurant on New Year's Eve. Like you had this, it's such a contrast,
Yeah.
this innocent, childlike view of this beautiful restaurant, which probably was great, but not as amazing as a 10-year-old saw it or however old you are,
Right.
a 13, 14-year-old. But like, so you're like, wow, this is so wonderful. And it's all,
Yeah.
and then in the next moment you have this drug dealer saying, hey, call cocaine soda. Like that just doesn't have, none of that's happening
Right.
to any of our
Protected our kids
children.
from that. Yeah.
So it's just, and they would never understand it. So yeah, we did invent helicopter parenting to a fault, but
Right.
they sure as hell are getting a childhood, good
Well,
or bad.
I have to tell you, you asked me earlier when I like really first noticed, like, so there's two moments to that I feel like I have to tell you. The moment when you realize you're not normal and it's a bad family setting, and then the moment when you realize what's happening is illegal, because they are not the same.
Yeah.
Just because somebody tells me soda and I shouldn't be doing things around people, you don't equate it as, oh my God, my dad's a bad guy. You just don't. You don't think in those terms. And this is so Gen X. The real moment when I realized that my father was the bad guy is we sat down to watch this 2-hour movie on NBC in October of 1984, and it was called Miami Vice.
Mm.
And which to this day is my favorite TV show of all time.
Yeah.
And I'm watching the movie, and these guys, it's the pilot. They call it a pilot now. It was a 2-hour movie, and if people liked it, they were going to pick it up for a TV series. And I'm like, these guys are going after a cocaine dealer, a big Colombian drug pen. Now, my father was not a Colombian drug pen, but like, it really hit me watching that show that he was a bad guy. Like, those cops would bust my dad. And that's when it really clicked for me, like how fucking bad it all was. And like, not only was I afraid of the guy who comes to the house and, and breaks into our house and shit like that, but now I'm really thinking like, well, he could go to jail too. And so any thoughts I ever had of telling anybody how bad things were, I didn't know what would happen if I did.
Mm.
And so then you're really stuck. You are fucked. Like you're like, I just so many times I wanted to tell my grandparents. And and you just can't because you're thinking, well, what if they called the police and where would I live? And I would run through all like, well, I don't want to live with my grandparents. I love them, but now I was older and I was starting to become independent. And the last thing I wanted to do, love them to death, was live with my grandparents in Steelton, who would probably make me go to bed every night at 9 o'clock. And plus, you always love your parents even though you hate them. And I couldn't see a situation where I was the reason they went to jail. I couldn't deal with that.
Yeah.
I was thinking
Yeah.
about that earlier. You were protecting your mom, but you probably had some pretty strong animosity towards your mom. You're
Fucking right.
not willing to be a narc or tell
Yes.
anybody you got secrets that you're
Yeah.
protecting, and you're protecting the people that are causing a lot of animosity and chaos in your life. What a
True.
dichotomy, right? That's
Right.
pretty heavy. And you're not 18
Everywhere you look, like everything is shit.
Yeah.
Like there's no scenario
Mhm.
or moment where you're not completely conflicted about your existence.
Well, and also
Yeah.
take into account you've been a victim of abuse.
Right.
So, I mean, that's a whole nother thing.
Well, that's what I'm touching on.
But
Yeah.
the physical
Yeah.
abuse
Yeah.
and then the mental and the
Right.
emotional abuse. Yeah. But you have
And
that.
it was mental more than anything.
Right.
He was very manipulative. My sister and I have had so many conversations since our mother died, like, you know, really understanding what our father was doing to us mentally to manipulate us to get what he wanted, to um, have us side against our mother. And there'd be situations where he would make fun of her in front of us and she would get upset and we would laugh about it.
Yeah.
And it fucking makes me sick.
Yeah.
It makes me sick. And that made her drink more.
Yes. She was alone.
Yeah.
She was
And
alone.
I was not a good, like, I was not a good son. I mean, it's just not, I didn't understand it.
Of
Nor
course.
should you have had
Right.
to understand
Right.
it. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. It's not anything that should have been expected. But, and especially knowing now that she probably did go through postpartum depression, she had mental health
Right.
issues that were never addressed. And then he needed to control her. So there was no way he was going to allow her to shine or build herself
Right.
up or be, because he needed her down. He needed to control her. And
There's no question.
I mean, she was absolutely a victim. There's no question about that.
I remember
So,
everybody thinking my mother was crazy and my dad was cool.
right.
That my dad was cool, but my mom was crazy. And I'm like, nobody fucking knows.
No.
You
And he
know,
probably,
like, but I kind of thought he was cool too. Like, there was a coolness about him. We talked about him being, a good salesman earlier and
Mm.
charismatic. There was a coolness about him and a craziness about my mother. But now I understand it all so much better.
Where, that day, he got the gun and chased those people off. Were you like,
Right.
wow, my dad's badass? What a fucking baller.
No, honestly, because what ruined it was the realization that they didn't know whether they should call the cops.
Yeah. There you go. Yeah.
I mean,
yeah.
normally I'd agree with you. Like,
Yeah.
if you remove all the shit and that happened, and my dad was a law-abiding guy who worked
Yeah.
9 to 5 every day, and he came home and he pulled that, I'm like, my dad's the biggest badass on the planet.
Mhm.
But that's not how I thought at the time.
Yeah.
Well, because you saw the hesitation because they were
Right.
criminals. So you're like, wait
Right.
a minute, you guys are supposed to know what to do. You don't know why don't you know
Right.
what? And then that makes a child feel even more insecure is my parents
Right.
are supposed to know what to do, especially in this type of a crisis situation.
Right.
Talk about,
Right.
so it sounds like he gaslit the shit out of her, let's be real. But
Yeah, he did.
he exploited that craziness in her.
Yes, he did.
And
And the more he
second
did it, the
picture,
more dependent she became on him, for him, of him.
yeah.
And you know, earlier in life, he had, I think, an angry drug customer who was calling our house nonstop. And one night, my dad just basically told him to go fuck himself on the phone. And later that night, somebody shot through our house, shot a bullet into our house, and bullet lodged in the front below our bay windows. If you imagine like the 8 boxes, 3 rows across, bay type windows, and below there was a bullet lodged in, because we heard the gun and our dog started barking, and that was before the burglary, and my parents never called the cops. And so that's when I said to them, when the burglary happened, you've got to fucking call the cops. Like, I had remembered that when that moment happened, I never felt safe again in the house, because somebody was willing to shoot at us and they wouldn't call the cops. And now this guy had broken into our house. I'm like, you better call the cops. And he
And
did.
at any time, did you know it's because of drugs?
Well, yeah. I mean, I did the first time. I kind of knew, but you don't learn to trust your instincts as a kid. You hear that little voice, but you don't know what it's saying to you. Now, when I'm 56, whenever I hear that little voice, I listen to it. But back then, like, I knew something was wrong, but I didn't think about it, because you don't want to think about it.
Right.
But I think the only reason he called the cops was, if somebody breaks into our house and I don't call the cops, then then everybody's going to, people talk, and people are going to know that you can break into our house, you can come to this house, and they won't call the cops.
Yeah.
So he had to. Like, I think he did it because he had to, not because he wanted to.
Right. And that's the smart part of him, right?
Yeah,
That's
it's
the
very
part of him where
calculating.
he's smart and he knows. So
Yeah.
when he was arrested at the antique store, was your mom also arrested?
They were arrested at our house.
Oh, at the house.
Yeah,
Were they
they
both
executed
arrested?
search warrants at both places. They were getting ready to come to my football game. They were home.
Okay.
And so they executed search warrants at both places. And eventually my dad told them where the drugs were, at the antique store, and that's where they found the drugs. They found a little bit at the house, because my sister, who was there the whole time, she answered the door when the cops came to the house. She answered, my sister at the time, 11 years old, 12, answered the door and watched them tear the house apart in front of her. And they bring out my parents in handcuffs and put them on the couch, the same couch where we posed for photos as a little boy and girl, and the photos on the coffee table in front of them, on that couch, in front of that couch where they are sitting. And because that was there for years, and I still have the photo. And they didn't even talk to her. You think my parents would be like, Caroline, we're so sorry, blah, 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 blah.
Yeah.
They were figuring out a plan on how they were going to talk to the cops, and they wouldn't even look at my sister. And eventually a relative came and picked up my sister. My sister got in the car and they drove off, and she looked down and she realized she didn't even have shoes on. She didn't even think about wearing shoes, because it was, how do you live with that trauma?
Yeah. Yeah.
I wasn't there. She was. And she watched all that happen right in front of her. And she remembers them cheering at one point, and she took that to mean they found something in the house.
I'm sure.
And, and the cop was trying to get my parents to talk, and they wouldn't talk. And then they found something, and the cop looked at my dad and said, too late now. But then my dad said, yeah, but then my dad told them where the cocaine was in the antique shop that they found. And, because at that point it became like, they were charging my mother, and he was going to do whatever it took to see that her charges were dropped. But he was going to jail. I thought they were both going to jail. And that's a whole other fucking thing. So now you are faced with the idea of, well, what's going to happen to us? Where are we going to live? I don't want to live in Steelton. My aunts don't have an extra bedroom. Like, what's going to happen? But then my dad cut a deal, pled guilty to the most serious charges. All the others were dropped. My mother was put on probation, and my dad got sentenced to 1.5 to 3. He could have suffered a huge fine and like a decade in jail, and he ended up doing 18 months.
And your mom?
which encompassed my entire senior year in high school. My dad was gone.
So he was in jail or
He
prison.
was in jail. He was in jail. Yeah. And my mother would go visit him every weekend.
And so you guys were able to stay in the house with your mom?
My sister stayed with our aunts, and I'm very happy that she did, because I had to try and get through my senior year of high school and care for a mother who was somehow had to run an antiques business and be an alcoholic, and try and get her through every day. And my dad ended up hiring somebody to work with her who was a fucking disaster and a nightmare. And I did not get along with. It was a woman I did not get along with, and I was convinced was stealing from us. I could tell. I was the only one who was fucking sober.
Right.
You know, I'm 17 years old. I could tell. This is 1987, and so yeah, my senior year was get my mom dressed for work in the morning, drive her to my grandparents in Steelton, somehow get to school on time, get into school, go to football practice, come back, pick her up down at the antique store, take her home, make her dinner, get her settled in, ask her not to drink, again, get drunk every night. And that was like that every day. And I'm just really glad my sister wasn't there. I was mad at the time she wasn't there in a way, because I had to fucking deal with it. So when you talk about the issue of being a parentified child, I'd never really heard of it till I wrote my book. And then somebody said, "Oh, you're a parentified child." I'm like, the fuck is that? And they're like, "Well, you're basically the adult of the house." I'm like, "That's me."
Yeah.
And it was me for a long time, long before my father left.
Yeah.
Went to prison.
So
I
Yeah.
visited him one time, and that was it. My mother visited him every week.
So wait, when this happened, was that the first time the extended family found out about the drug dealing?
You know, I've been asked that question, and I don't really know. I don't know what they knew and how they knew. You just didn't talk about it. They knew they smoked pot. It was obvious to everybody they smoked pot.
Right.
And, you know, you come in a house and you smell like pot.
Right.
And so everybody knew they did pot, and I'm pretty sure they probably knew they did cocaine. Did they think he was a major drug dealer? No, I don't think they did, but they knew that things weren't great in the house. And I've since had conversations with my family, and they were like, we talked so many times about, should we try and take you away from them? And you know, but you just can't at the end of the day. Everybody's got their own problems too. And they took Caroline, and I'm glad they took Caroline.
Was that like court ordered or just the family
No,
decided?
just family decision.
And your mom was fine with that. Just let
I
her
don't think my mom knew right from wrong
what was
anyway,
going on.
or left from right, quite
Right.
frankly.
Mhm.
So
Yeah.
there was no arguments there.
Was this when the girlfriend was part of your life too, at least during that senior year?
No, we dated my junior year after the arrest.
Okay.
Dated my junior year and then broke up prior to my senior year. So I was single my entire senior year, and honestly, I don't think I had a serious girlfriend until I think my sophomore year in college. I took 2 years off after high school because as soon as my dad went to jail, I said, fuck my grades. And I didn't give two shits. And I did just enough to graduate from high school. Like, I remember failing a science class. Some teacher going, Dave, you're failing. I go, and I looked at the teacher and I just said, I don't need it to get my diploma. And I didn't. I just fucking failed it. Just trigonometry or something.
Yeah.
You know, and then I took 2 years off. So, you know, I didn't go to college until I was 20. And
What did you do during those 2 years?
everything. Got my insurance license, flipped pizzas, framed art, worked in sporting goods. I remember at one point having 4 jobs at once. My bigger job was insurance, and then I worked in sporting goods, and then I framed art on the weekends. And then I hated insurance and fuck that. And then I was framing art, and then I finally, and this is after my dad came home, but I just finally said, like, I gotta fucking get out of here. And I was an awful student, right? I told you how I just screw my grades. And I went into my high school when I was 19. I'd been out for 2 years, and almost 2 years. And I walked in, my guidance counselor was still there. And she said, I knew you'd be back. And She's like, you're too smart not to go to college. And I just really appreciated that.
Yeah.
And she devised a plan for me to apply. And the plan was basically, let's apply to as many fucking colleges as we can and see who is going to take you as a student, uh, looking at your transcripts. And the first school that accepted me was this little liberal arts school in just outside of Altoona called St. Francis College. And I went up and did a tour. My dad was out of jail at this point. Um, and he insisted on going with me. I'm like, I remember thinking, like, why the fuck is this guy going with me to college? And I went up there and I met with the guidance counselor, and I just fucking aced that interview. Like, I told her, I said, don't look at my transcript and judge me just by my transcript. I'd been through a lot in 2 years, and I'm ready to be a serious student. And I think I graduated with college with like a 3.3. The only bad semester I had was when I pledged my fraternity. I had like a 2.3 GPA, and I chased graduating with honors for 3.5 years, and I just fell just short at like a 3.35 or something like that. But it changed me, like it being out in the real world, going through what I went through, knowing that the only path out for me was college, a degree, and doing something with that degree. I just got a lot more serious, man. Now I had fun in college. Don't get me wrong; they were 4 great years, but I got good grades, and I really appreciate it. I didn't take anything for granted ever again.
Those 2 years between
Yeah,
going to college and graduating, were you living at home?
I was.
Was
Yeah,
that when
my
your dad
mother.
was when
And then he came home.
was
Yeah.
he smoking crack at that? Is that when he smoked crack? Was during
Oh
those
no,
years?
he had gone. He was smoking crack before he went to jail.
Okay.
Yeah, sorry. So
Okay.
yeah, he smoked crack very early on. Like, it's just so funny when I see all these Hollywood. I remember when crack came in. The movie New Jack City came out, and everybody's
Yeah.
talking about the crack crisis in cities, and I'm going, fuck. There's a
Yeah.
crack crisis in the room right next to me in
Yeah.
suburban America, which I think is another interesting part of that whole Gen X story. Is people think crack was just done in cities by uh, people on the streets. No, crack was being done in suburban enclaves across America because it was cheap.
Yeah.
It was cheap. And my dad was one of the people doing it because he was selling it. And yeah, so he did that before he got arrested. That was all kind of part of his thing. And then he came home and started doing drugs right away.
He did.
I
I
mean, he
was
was on
going to ask if
parole.
he sobered up at all, or did he ever
No,
sober up?
he came home one day. I was always afraid of my father. He's like 5'10", 5'11", and he was heavy set, like 225. And, I'm 5'6". At that time. I'm still probably only like 145, something like that. Now I'm a lot bigger. Now I'm still 5'6", don't get me wrong, but I'm a lot more filled out now. And he came home one day. I was getting ready to go to work, and his eyes were just glazed over. And I just looked at him. I'm like, are you fucking kidding me? And he just kind of smiled. And I said, you're on fucking parole. I said, they're gonna they're gonna yank your parole. And he just looked at me. He said, no, they're not. So what do you mean they're not? He goes, look at me. Something like this. I don't remember the exact words. Look at me. I'm an older man. I'm not a flight risk. I'm uh, I'm not dealing drugs anymore. I'm just an old guy. I'm the least of their problems. They're never going to bother me. And guess what? They never did.
That's
They
that
never did.
that's
He
that
knew it.
part of his brain.
Yes. Yeah.
He,
That made him so smart and
yes.
so self-destructive.
Yes. If he could only have
And
channeled that into something positive and he would have been such a success, honestly.
yeah. And so I said, you got to be fucking kidding me. He's like, I'm not fucking kidding you. He goes, get the fuck out of my way, or something like that. And I grabbed him and I jacked him up in that same corner where he beat the fuck out of me years earlier for my report card. And I just looked at him, man. And that's when I made that decision. Like, I'm fucking out of here and I'm going to go to college and I'm going to figure out a way to pay for it. So what I didn't tell you is my grandparents were saving up to pay for our college,
Mm-hmm.
and they used the money they saved up to get them lawyers when they got arrested.
Oh man.
and all our college money was gone. So we had no way. My sister ended up getting all kinds of. My sister was an excellent student. Ended up getting a scholarship, um, an academic scholarship for most of everything she needed at Penn State University Park.
That's
Really, just a
awesome.
brilliant. My sister's brilliant, and I just had to cobble it together. Like, I should have gone to like a state school here in PA, where at the time it was probably like $7,000-8,000 a year, but I didn't know any better. And St. Francis accepted me, and as soon as they accepted me, I accepted because I couldn't believe somebody accepted me. And
Right.
it was like $25,000 a year. I got a lot of it. I was able to get aid for a lot of it, but I still left school with about $40,000 in college debt, which took me till I was like 40 to pay off. But I didn't have anybody to tell me any different. I just
Right.
wanted to get to college. And I go up on that trip with my father, and um, there's a fountain in the middle of St. Francis, and a St. Francis fountain. And he's sitting there waiting for me after my meeting with admissions. And he's like, ask me how I did. I'm like, good. And he goes, I just remember him looking down and going, how are you going to pay for it? I go, I'm going to figure out a way. I said, I've gotten this far, like I'm going to figure out a way. And I just remember he said at the time, he just kind of looked, he was just looking up at St. Francis. He said, I just want you to know I know what I did. And
Wow.
that's probably the closest I've ever gotten to an apology. And that was a good moment for me. And 4 months later, I said goodbye to my family. They were actually leaving for the beach. I remember waving to my sister as they were leaving, made peace with my mother, sort of made peace with my father. And then I went to visit my grandmother. My grandfather had passed, and I was like $2,000 short of going to college. And I was $2,000 short, and I didn't have it. And every paycheck I got, I was putting money into it. And she wrote me a check for $2,000. She said, see, I told you we were going to pay for you to go to college. And I just remember feeling so guilty about leaving her behind with them
Yeah.
and my sister. And
But you had to
I
save
could still,
yourself.
I could still, I could still see her um, pull the shade down, wave to me, and pull the shade down, knowing that she knew it was going to suck. But she's like, you got to go. This is what me and your grandfather wanted all these years, and we knew this day was coming. You got to go. And she said, someday you'll understand. And she was right.
Yeah. You had to
Yeah.
save yourself. You did. You saved yourself. You had the
Yeah.
strength to save yourself. And as a parent, you know that she was feeling that way about you, that
Right.
you need to go. Like that made her happy was you
Yeah, for
leaving
sure.
for
Yeah.
sure, and your father saying that to you is so powerful and so what a profound moment because you're right, that's the closest you were going to get to an apology or any
Yeah.
accountability. So what
Any
a moment.
accountability.
What a moment. It and I don't know if you're religious. I am religious, but I honestly am I'm interpreting as God was in that moment for sure, like guiding him. And anyone can interpret it anyway, but that's how
Sure.
I'm interpreting it is like
Sure.
that was the hand of God for sure. Like because he almost got straight for that moment and did the right thing
Right.
in that
Right.
brief
And I
moment.
didn't even want him to be there.
Right.
And by the way, when I left for college, you know how emotional parents get, and oh my God, we're taking our baby to college and dropping them off for freshman orientation. I told them, I said, I got this. I got this. And I drove myself up there, filled my car up with all my belongings and left. And, then it was the next phase of my life.
Yeah.
But I would say this to you, you never know how trauma manifests itself. And I swore I would never be like my father. And then um, I had a long-term girlfriend in college, starting my last 2 years, junior year, and all through and into my 20s. And I remember coming home one time for college and her saying something. I can't even honestly remember what she said. and it was so um, um, simple, like nothing controversial or anything. And I fucking tore into her and just said the meanest shit to her. And like, I almost fell over when I was done because it just made me realize that something was wrong with me. And like, I had real anger issues, and I sounded like my father talking to my mother, and it really fucked me up for a while. And I definitely think I torpedoed relationships for a while because I did not want to go down that road. But I will tell you that I deal with it today. I deal with anger issues today. Um, I've just started going back to therapy. I think a lot of it came as a result of this book. I did therapy about 10 years or so ago and really felt like it helped me, but then I just stopped. And, but since then, and writing this book, like I've had so many things bubble up and um, you just kind of create these thoughts that I have. And, I'm always striving to be a better person. And especially for my daughter and, for my wife and even my son who's out of the house now, doing really, really well. Great kid. Um, you can never stop trying to get better, I think. And I think that's what we learned in our generation is you can always get better. You can always improve yourself. And I'm just so lucky that I recognized it in that moment in college. But it's been a struggle ever since. Like I'm a hothead. I am like I'm a hothead. Like I'm not an alcoholic. I'm not a drug addict. I'm not this, but I've got anger in me from years of trauma. And it's stuff I never dealt with. Never dealt with it until a couple, like I said, about 10 years ago when I did a little bit of therapy on it, but never really dove into it. And now I am. And it's just funny being on the outside now, looking at me in college and looking at me as a young guy. Like I just thought, being pissed off or having a hot fuse is just being Italian. And it's not being Italian, it's not a cultural thing. It's a learned thing. And so I'm trying to grasp and get better at it every day. But man, I just think about that moment, that realization of being like my father. It just makes me sick.
Yeah, it sounds like a huge turning point. I think it's so understandable, though, if you look at your entire foundational beginning of life was built in trauma
Right,
and what and being a parentified child and what you were exposed to, the rage that's probably simmered in you,
right,
the hypervigilance you lived under, your nervous system was whack, just gone,
right.
and you were like the Hulk, probably, right? Just always simmering, the simmering rage, right? But
I
that,
never thought of it that
yeah,
way.
but I
I
mean,
was always more of a Spider-Man fan myself, but yeah, that's actually a good
but
point.
yeah, it's like you're always simmering. It's the rage is
Right.
always there. But there's a reason. There's a reason because all of your formative years were built on this utter traumatic
You,
chaos. And so to displace it with that argument with the girlfriend, I think it's amazing that you had the self-awareness in that moment to recognize, okay, this
I
is okay.
apologized. I apologized to her immediately, and like I still feel like I owe her an apology.
No, that's good.
you know,
Listen, you're a
you
man
know.
who apologized. That is a miracle
Yeah.
in itself.
Have you have
But
you ever looked into there's a behavioralist, B.F. Skinner, and
yeah, sure,
really
absolutely.
goes into the intermittent learning thing.
Yeah.
And that I was thinking about a little while ago. It's like the once a year or once every maybe twice a year beat down from your dad. It's an
Yeah.
intermittent learning thing. The showing up to the games, but really maybe nothing else is an intermittent
Right.
learning thing. That shit is the most powerful way to learn. And
Really is, isn't
yeah, and I mean, like
it?
your story blows me away, man.
But you think about it though, Gen
Here's
X,
real quick though, real quick.
yeah.
when you say that to me, like it just feels like, but that's just how it was. Like I don't feel blown. Like it. I still don't identify that way. Like I just feel like that was just my life.
Right.
I say in my book, some people say it's trauma. I just called it life.
Right.
And so when you say that, but I know what you're saying, Brian, and I agree with you, but I still have a hard time. Like it's just how it was.
Well, what I mean too, though, is what blows me away is you're here, you're
Yeah.
present, you're writing a book, you speak so fondly of your family and your life, right? You survived. So that's
Right.
what blows me away. The chaos, I think we all had some bit of chaos. Yours is on another level than mine personally.
Hmm.
But you survived and you're a functioning guy and you're still working
Right.
on yourself. And I do think that's could be that Gen X piece. It's just I'm blown away because I find you remarkable more so
No.
than the chaos of your upbringing. That's a whole other
I'm gonna
thing.
I'm gonna tell my kids you said that, so we're clear.
Well, I mean, and in my opinion is I think the chaos of your upbringing is utterly next level. There's no question about it. But yes, the fact that you have gotten to this point coming from that foundation, because what I
Right.
was going to say was Gen X, we grinded through adulthood, right? Because we just keep doing, we just keep getting through it. We're just gonna, okay, that happened, okay, but we're gonna keep going, we're gonna keep going, never stopping, giving ourselves space to acknowledge anything. And so a lot of us, especially ones who grew up with trauma, then we got into adulthood, grinded through adulthood, now we're midlife,
Right.
and it's only now where we're like, okay, wait a minute here, and taking that moment to look back at that kid and say, okay, you didn't deserve that, that was totally messed up, and
Right.
not only examine the root causes of why we are the way we are, but honor that kid, because
Well,
nobody did. And it's
and
like, you know what, I'm going to look back and acknowledge what happened to you
Well said.
and honor you because no one did, so now I'm going to, and taking the time to do that for ourselves.
and you wrote a book about it. So you're going into the lion's den.
It's a
You're
good
going
point.
back into reliving some shit that
Well,
would be a hell of a lot more comfortable to bury it.
I, I I always had that book in me, and I've always been a writer. I mean, when I went to college, St. Francis, I had to pick a major, and I took English Comp 101, and I discovered that I could write. And I ended up being an English literature major
Mm.
because they didn't have like a comms track there or a journalism major. I ended up getting into journalism when I got out because what the hell is she going to do when you write? So I went and got my master's in journalism, but I mean, I discovered that I could write, and I've always been interested in telling this story, but I just didn't want to go there. And then I thought, well, I'm 54 at the time when my mother died, and it's now or never. Like it's literally now or never. And it was a um, it was an interesting process. I mean, I had real sessions with my sister. Just all right, let's how do we slot these things? Like let's remember the years. When did this happen? How old were we? Yeah, I don't profess to be accurate with everything, and I even say in the forward, like, I remember everything to the best of my ability, but it all happened, and I wish it didn't. So I might be off in some times and some dates, but everything we write about happened.
I'm curious, you say you're a hothead. I can relate
Hmm.
to that too. Um, but as you've gone through this journey,
Hmm.
some of it's probably fairly cathartic, probably somewhat
Yes.
healing, but there's
Yes.
probably another side that's enraged you at times too, right? Have
Yes.
you kind of gone through that roller coaster while you're going through this process?
Well, I was having a conversation one time with my sister, and she was talking about all the nice things Dad did, and I said, Carolyn, I said, think about it. He manipulated us. Like, think about it. Think about this or that, or we'd bring up something else. He was constantly manipulating us and manipulating our mother in just awful ways. And I will tell you, though, that I do love my father. I mean, I do because, I want to believe that there's good in everybody. And I know that there were moments of good and the trooper was right. Like they didn't start out life like this. Uh, they didn't. And so there is a grace that I want to extend, Brian. in a situation like this. It's not always comfortable for me, and people don't understand it when I say, I still love my father, but um, he was my dad.
Well, that's
Yeah.
for you though. That
Yeah,
giving him grace isn't for your father, it's for you.
it's a really
Because
good point.
that's part of your healing journey, is being able
Yeah,
to give him grace. And the person who benefits from that is you. So it makes
And
sense.
everyone around him.
Well, yeah,
Around you.
because you heal, because it heals a part of you.
right, right.
So you got your degree in English literature. Where did you
hmm
go to get your master's in journalism?
Ball State University. I was all set to go to Syracuse School of Newhouse School of Communications. And the day after I graduated college, I got a letter in the mail from Ball State offering me a full graduate assistantship, basically a full ride uh, to get my master's degree. And I turned around and did that in 10 months, got my master's in
Wow.
journalism.
Yeah, cool.
And then back in those days, you snail mailed all your cover letters and resumes and packets. I spent so much damn money sending that shit out. And I got one job interview in Hanover, Pennsylvania. I wasn't necessarily trying to come back to the Harrisburg area. I was going to go wherever I could get a job in Hanover, Pennsylvania. And I remember getting an interview. I wanted to be a sports reporter at the time. I wanted to be the next great sports columnist. And guy's like, I can't pay you much. He goes, I can pay you $16,000 a year. And I took the job. And I remember thinking, if I only made $30,000 a year, it's all I ever need. Because I was only making 16 at the time. And then a new editor came in there and he saw something in me and said, I want you to cover news. I'm like, I'm not covering news. I want to be a sports columnist. He goes, do you like working nights and weekends? I go, absolutely not, which is what you are as a sports reporter.
Yeah.
And, I still was dating my college girlfriend at the time, so I didn't really get to see her. And we lived in different areas. And I'm like, he's like, I'll put you on the deadline desk every morning, 7:30 to 3:30. And I just took off from there. And he went to a bigger newspaper in York County, Pennsylvania, and I followed him there. And then I ended up getting back to Harrisburg, my hometown, covering state government for a number of newspapers. And the final newspaper I worked for was the Allentown Morning Call, which was the fourth largest paper in Pennsylvania. And I was covering state government for them. And then I eventually went into government and became on the press staff for Governor Tom Ridge, and then his successor after 9/11. I went to work 1 month before 9/11.
Wow.
Yeah, and then Tom Ridge left to be the director of Homeland Security under Bush, and shortly thereafter, I became the press secretary to Governor Mark Schweiker. Still a friend to this day.
So how is it different? You're writing for these papers and then
Mm-hmm.
working in government. So
Mm-hmm.
what exactly are you doing as a press secretary?
Right. Well, you're the spokesperson for the governor. I mean, it's
So
sort of
are you
like
going out
being.
and talking to people on his behalf? So you went from
Oh yeah.
writing
Well,
to being in
reporters
front of
call
people?
me. Reporters call
Oh,
me.
okay,
What's the
okay.
governor's take on this? What's the governor's take on that? And so you could Google me to this day and see Schweiker spokesperson David La Torre. I was a deputy for Ridge, so I'd still be identified as a spokesperson for Tom Ridge. Said this about House Bill 1595,
Okay.
whatever that is at that time. And I remember, talking about growing up the way I did. I remember like as number two deputy or something like that at the time, and I got called down to a meeting. I got to sit in on this important meeting. Budget negotiations were taking place, and I was a lit major and a journalism major for my master's, but I also got minors at each stop in political science. So I was always interested in
Mm.
politics. And we're sitting at this table, and all these hardened political veterans are there, and I'm this new guy, and Ridge's press secretary turned to me and he said, "Dave, did you ever think you'd be here?" And I just didn't even hesitate. I looked at him and I said, "Yeah, yeah." And he goes, "That's a great answer." But he didn't understand. Like,
Mhm.
I've seen the worst,
Yeah.
and this is not the worst. And to this day, as a crisis counselor, um, I'm sorry, but nothing makes me panic. It just doesn't. I mean, when I got hired when I was in the private sector to help Penn State during the Jerry Sandusky scandal, got hired about 6 months after that scandal broke, and the university's communications were shit and the messaging was shit, and they had done such an awful job communicating to the rest of the world. And I was included in a team with a PR firm called Edelman, the largest privately held public relations firm in the world. And they recruited me, and I sort of became the Pennsylvania press face for Penn State during Sandusky. Every university employee had my phone number during that scandal, because if a reporter called, then they're supposed to refer them to me. So, just a real quick funny story. I'm checking in the Nittany Lion Inn one night, which is on the university's. It was a university hotel, and I'm exhausted. And I forgot my wallet in the car. I don't know why. I just had it in the middle console, and lady's like, "Could I have your ID?" And I'm like, "I'm sorry, I left it in the car." She goes, "I'm going to see your ID," and I just said, "Listen, my name's Dave La Torre, and there's my phone number on your pad right there, 717 ba 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 ba." And I rattled out. She goes, "You're Mr. La Torre?" I'm like, "Yes, I am." She goes, "Okay, all right. You just bring your wallet in later. Here's your room key, you know." But I, it's just I never set out to be a crisis communications counselor. It just kind of grew that way, and I noticed that I don't panic in situations when people want to. I always say when people want to run out of the room, I walk in. And my sister doesn't do what I do, but we both feel the same way. We've talked about it. Like, we don't, she's the same way. Like, when other people panic at work, she's very level headed.
Do you know what
Like,
that is?
I
It's a trauma response. And you know
knew you were
what?
going to say trauma
No, but you
response.
know what's happening is
Oh,
you guys thrive physiologically had high cortisol your whole childhood from
Right,
trauma,
right,
which your
right.
body becomes addicted to. It actually then
Interesting.
functions the best with high cortisol. And actually, when people heal and get into normal cortisol levels, that's actually uncomfortable because it's almost like you're going through withdrawal. And it's why a lot of people stay in traumatic situations, trauma, toxic relationships, abusive relationships, because that's the norm, right? Their body is
Right,
literally more comfortable with that in that trauma state than
right,
the calm, lower normal cortisol. So in crisis situations, your cortisol goes up, and that's what you know, and that's where
you thrive.
you're all of a sudden like superhero because you're like,
Mm.
oh, I
Never
know how
thought
to
of
do
that.
this, and you actually calm
Right. Yeah,
We
I do.
calm because I am the same. When
Yeah.
things get crazy, I'm so calm because I'm
Right.
like, I know this.
drives me crazy.
This is my
Right.
this is my where I shine.
Right.
Like he might shine with the normal stuff. Give me
Right.
the chaos.
We have
Right.
we had a guest, Denise Conde, who
Yeah.
talks about this. If you're interested, she talks about this because she came from a pretty pretty chaotic background as well, and she can chase the dopamine through chaos a little bit.
But yeah, she talks about how those of us who've gone through trauma in crisis, we're the most calm and the
Yeah,
most like,
Yeah.
this is our jam, man.
It just is. It just is in a really
You know.
weird way. And listen, I don't want to be disingenuous and say I don't have moments where I panic in life, or
Well, yeah.
or I
Yeah.
mean, it's not like that doesn't happen. But
Right.
when the shit hits the fan and it's really serious and a lot's at stake, like, I hyper focus at that point, and I can really kind of see through things that people can't to the other side. And I don't think to your point. You apply the science to my whole philosophical take on the fact that I was kind of born to do this.
Literally.
you
Yeah,
know, you did a hell of a job for Penn State because they were waffling in the beginning.
it was bad.
It was
It
terrible. They had no message.
yeah, yeah, it was bad. And and we were a good team, myself and Edelman. I mean, some really talented, world class people. And we had a great working relationship. Friends with a lot of those folks today, and I'd like to think that we did do a good job.
Tremendous job. I'm a Penn State fan. Didn't go there, but I grew up in the
Right.
Northeast and Jopa and everything. I went to Penn State football camp as a junior in high school. So
Wow.
Maternal was there, Sandusky was there, all those guys, right? Nothing happened
Right.
to me, for the record, but
Sure. Yeah.
yeah,
So
I watched that pretty closely.
how did
Yeah.
you go from being a press secretary to crisis communication? Like,
Sure. I opened my own public relations firm after I was out, and I've had that for 20 years now. And look, we do plenty of traditional public relations. Like my firm represents a casino in Western Pennsylvania, and we represent associations that are law enforcement, things like that. But um, you know, through the years, I've taken on a number of crisis situations with clients, and it just sort of developed. I mean, because when I was in the governor's office, you deal with crisis every day,
Mm.
and you learn you kind of learn the whole tricks of the trade. Like we had something called, some people might remember it, in 2002, the Quecreek mine rescue in August of 2002. We're coming up on 1 year anniversary of 9/11. America's really still, I mean, in the economic drag and emotional drag of the 9/11 terrorist attacks. And these 9 miners get trapped in Somerset County, Pennsylvania. And I'm the governor's press secretary, and I fly out, and we're there for 4 days, trying to dig these guys out. Uh, Governor showed tremendous leadership. I was the only member of senior staff that was there for 4 days, and just helping to message through the whole thing. And you learn a lot there. I learned a lot on how to handle a crisis in a situation like that. And, I tell people all the time, when it comes to media training and interacting with reporters, I talked a lot with reporters then. I'm so glad I did, because reporters handle a lot of crisis situations. That's what they cover.
yeah.
And I knew enough to know that I didn't know enough. And I found a couple reporters that I really respected and trusted. And I'm like, and they gave me good tips. Sometimes I listened and sometimes I didn't. Not because I didn't agree with them, but sometimes a reporter requests more things than you can provide. And I learned a lot through that whole exercise. And thank God all 9 of those miners were rescued, or that crisis could have been a lot worse. And then you never know how it's going to end up. But I learned a lot through that, and that really kind of set a template for me afterwards when I put my own shingle out and formed La Torre Communications, which is a company I've had for over 20 years now, based in Harrisburg, Pennsylvania. And I've just developed that niche. And to this day, like, I've got a number of clients whose names I could never tell you, who have had a crisis that I've helped them, and while maintaining strict confidentiality. And I'm just really proud of that record. And, somebody calls me, hey, it is funny though. I've gotten lots of calls where people say, I've got a crisis, and it's like not a crisis, and I'll tell them, like, it's not a crisis, and here's what you need to do. And hey, this one's on me, and you don't owe me anything, but I would do this, this, and this, and you're going to be fine. But to them, they don't know the difference.
Right.
But,
Right.
but there's been plenty of crises that I've worked on through the years, and I've just, thankfully, I've been able to develop that reputation as just I think a calm counselor when it's really needed.
Did you start the company after working at Penn State?
I worked at another, no, I didn't work for Penn State. I was a consultant for them. I was
Oh,
not an employee. I had already had my firm, and my
oh, okay.
firm, I partnered with Edelman to represent Penn State. We went up and
Gotcha.
pitched Penn State to handle they had another PR firm there from the outside at the time, and they were moving on from them. They wanted to bring somebody fresh in to kind of hit the reset button on
Yeah.
everything. And we got hired. So I was basically a consultant for them, but never an employee. And this was while I had my firm. So my firm started in 2000, 2005, and the Penn State scandal happened 2011.
So was that your first big scandal, or had you handled
Mm,
something?
I don't know that I'll ever have a scandal bigger than that.
Yeah.
Like, that's
Pretty
a
big.
big one. It's
Yeah.
an international story. Like, I'm being called by reporters in Australia.
Yeah.
And that's how it was during the Quecreek mine rescue, by the way. So I had that reference point, in dealing with the media. And all of a sudden Geraldo Rivera shows up at the rescue site and setting up tents and wanting to interview your governor and blah 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 blah. You know, Geraldo was really brash at that time, and
Mm-hmm.
I'm like, yeah, all right, I'm going to put on my show. And then somebody came to me and said, he's going to sandbag your governor. He's going to sandbag the governor. He's going to have some labor guys on, and they're going to trash the governor while he's on the air. And I just remember walking over to Geraldo's producer, who was his brother. I said, I'm not putting my guy on. I hear you guys are going to smoke and blah, 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 blah. And he walks over to Geraldo. Geraldo walks over. He goes, what's the problem? I explained it to him. He said, you put your guy on my show and I'll make him a star. And he walked away. And I put him on the show and he did not sandbag him.
So Geraldo's a man of his word, maybe.
Well, I mean, Geraldo, that's such a blast.
That's when he was with Fox News back then.
Yes,
yeah, that's when he was with Fox News.
I don't know
think
where
he does CNN.
He is now.
He does CNN panel stuff. I don't know if
Okay.
He's older now, but he's still very sharp.
Yeah,
he's still
he is
very sharp.
Did you kind of, so 9/11 happened and
yes,
I think you said
1 month. I was there 1 month. Yes.
Did you get kind of thrown to the wolves? Were you speaking for the governor then?
I'd only been with the governor's office for a month. So like I wasn't a major decision maker or, in really serving one of those key leadership roles during 9/11, just to be clear about that. But the thing that I got asked to staff the governor one night when there was going to be a memorial service for the families of the Flight 93 victims who crashed in Somerset County. So I remember going there's a resort there called Seven Springs, a ski resort. And all the relatives of those killed in Flight 93 were staying there throughout the process. And there's going to be this memorial service, and I remember going to this room where the service was going to be held and looking at all the family members of the Flight 93 victims going basically thinking what the fuck am I doing here? I mean, it was the most dread I've ever felt because you feel helpless. And I remember going to one of the rows of the chairs and because they were kind of all packed and the governor wasn't there, so I wasn't working yet. And I saw this little girl with long blonde hair laying down across two chairs with her head on an older woman's lap. And I don't know who she was to this day. And I just felt I just said to her, I said, can I get you something? And she said a Coke. She wanted a Coke. And I remember going to get this girl a Coke and finding a straw and putting a straw in it. And I walked over to her, and I don't know if this older woman was her grandmother or aunt. I don't know. And I remember handing it to her, and she said, thank you. And she put it down on the ground, and she laid back down and never touched the Coke. And I've always wondered what happened to her. I was wondering what happened to that little girl. And I can't believe it's been 25 years. Yeah. It'll be 25 years in September.
Yeah.
And I tie it back to, anyway, that I get a call I have to come back to Harrisburg immediately. And that somebody else is going to come. The governor can't make it tonight, and somebody else is going to come in his stead, and you just need to get in a car and you need to drive to Harrisburg right away. And I remember thinking, he's going to Washington. And that was the night that Bush announced that he would be the new Homeland Security Director, the first ever Homeland Security Director. And to be surrounded in that moment by history, just was so, it made everything else, not in my life, not to talk about my childhood or anything, but just made everything just so trivial at that moment, because there were these immense moments in history and you were right there and you feel like a witness to it. And that's what made Quecreek, the Quecreek mine rescue, so impactful, was that rescue site was a mere miles from the site of Flight 93. And the families reached out to the families of the mine families at the time. and our governor was on site, and he was the lieutenant governor during 9/11, and now he was the governor because Tom Ridge had to resign and go to Washington, and um, we needed a win. America needed a win. And when those 9 miners came up alive, like something changed for us as a country then. And I think the world even felt a little bit better because it just been such a stark, like, it's hard for people who weren't born back then, and it's really hard for me to wrap my head around the fact that kids in college today were not alive during 9/11. But it's hard for some people to get their head around the fact that we really needed a win there. That it was things were so bad, morale was bad, the economy was in the tank. The economy tanked after 9/11. Like everybody was down, and of all places, a mere miles from where a plane crashed, were the first fighters in the global war on terrorism. Uh, um, it was fought in the skies above Pennsylvania that day when those people made sure that that plane did not crash into, God forbid, the White House or Capitol Hill, or and here in that same spot, these 9 miners are rescued, and that's something that stuck with me, forever. And I just had a meeting out there, because my former boss, the governor, is going to do an event to mark the 25th anniversary at the school in Shanksville. Shanksville was where the crash site is.
Right.
And he's going to do an event with a couple people from back then, uh, um, to mark the 25th anniversary, what it was like back then, what everybody was thinking, and something that they want to record for posterity so people remember it. And it's just hard for me to believe it was 25 years ago. And uh, I went out to that meeting, it was like 2 weeks ago, and it was the first time I could stop at Flight 93, the National Historic Site, and take it all in. And if you've never been there, and a lot of people, it's right off the Pennsylvania Turnpike. And if you're listening to the show and you're driving down the Pennsylvania Turnpike and you pass the Somerset exit, or you're coming on the Somerset exit, that's right where the Flight 93 memorial is. And it is so moving. I highly, highly recommend it. It does a great job teaching kids about what happened that day above the skies and after the crash, and how the site was handled. And it is so moving that if you can't be moved by it, you are not human. And I was just really glad that I stopped by there. But I don't know about you guys, but I look at 9/11 as dread for me every year.
Yeah.
Like, it's dread. It is. I can't think about the horrific way that people died that didn't deserve it.
Yeah.
Not that anybody deserves it, but I mean, people making decisions to jump off the buildings,
Yeah.
100 stories in the air rather than burn up. And those people on that Flight 93 who knew they were going to die and decided to stop these guys, and knew that they weren't going to survive. And I'm so in all of them, all of them, all these years later. It's just really hard for me to. I just can't stand September 11th every year. And strangely, my son was born September 10th, and we had just had his we had just had his second birthday party the night before. It's crazy.
It is crazy because it's such a normal, beautiful thing to do, and then the next day is one of the worst days in American history. I feel like I've tried to describe it to the kids because just when we were you were talking about it, like I have a physical reaction when I talk about
Yeah,
9/11.
I
I can
totally
feel it in
agree.
my body,
Yeah,
and I get tears in my eyes.
right.
And I don't think it's a PTSD, but I physiologically have a physiological reaction because it is. I feel like I think about something related to 9/11 at least once a week randomly. Something will
Mm-hmm.
pop in my head. And I just think for those of us who Brian was actually supposed to be arriving into the bottom of one of the towers around that time, and he had
My
changed the
God.
meeting to the next
Wow.
day, or else,
My buddy
yeah,
got in, and when the first plane hit and heard the rumble, and He's like, I'm
Mm,
out of here and headed back to Jersey.
But he was supposed to have a
smart
meeting
move.
with Lego on 9/11 and changed it to
Wow.
9/12. But then his team, he was part of a team that went into the city the next day, right?
Within a couple days. Yeah, we set up,
Wow.
I think it was Pier 94 in Manhattan. It was the DNA
Right.
collection spot. I'm in IT. We blew out a bunch of phones and computers and little rooms, and for people
Mm,
to bring in toothbrushes and
mm,
combs and stuff so they could try to match DNA. Little did anyone know it was all dust.
Right. That's when
right.
there was hope. But
Yeah, the
he
hope.
was gone for a few days. It was,
Remember, people had photos on the walls like
yes,
my loved one's
missing.
missing. Oh my
I was there,
God.
and that's what the scene was as we'd walk out, because we went in and we're like in this pier, which is really just a big, long
Right.
office building tube in a sense. And then you
Right.
come out to just kind of see what's going on. And you're right. They had billboards, people's
Right.
pictures, people crying. It was crazy, man.
It's
Crazy.
it's
I
horrific.
deny it all, though. Like when we went to Manhattan, we were in New York a few months ago or a few years ago. And I find it interesting. I think I could go to the thing you're talking about, the memorial for
Right.
the plane, because I'm detached. But we went to, what's it called? The Freedom Tower or whatever?
We went to the
Right.
9/11 memorial where you
Yeah,
go
sure.
inside and all that. And my older two and I went in, but Brian, he couldn't do it. He couldn't go in.
It's not, I
And
don't think
I
you can.
perfectly understand it. I don't
Yeah.
want to go to it.
I don't need to see a memorial. I lived it.
Right.
And then New York's
Yeah.
my city. I grew up 45 miles outside of Manhattan. I used to go there as a kid and sneak in as teens, go back as it's my town. And
It's so
I don't need the memorial for me
right.
personally, but I get it.
They
It's
did a
so
wonderful
sad.
job.
I'm still
Oh,
pissed. I
I'm
guess.
sure. Right. It's so sad that like you would want, like, I think it's a seminal moment of our generation's lives is 9/11. It used to be something very positive. I always thought it was the fall of the Berlin Wall.
Mm.
I always thought, like, that's a seminal moment of my lifetime in world history. And now I feel like it's 9/11, and that sucks.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Just really
Yeah.
sucks. It just has so much impact on. I mean, let's face it. And I'm not here to talk politics, but American foreign policy is, so much of it was dictated by that day. Since
Yeah.
then, it changed the world. It
Yeah.
changed the world, and it's crazy.
I love how you refer to those people in the
Yes.
plane being the first fight back. That's fucking brilliant, man. I love that because it's so spot on. Those people made that choice instead of just riding it out to see, oh, let's see where it goes. No, fuck that. Let's go
Right.
get these guys. And
They were the first
I
heroes.
love how you frame it.
They
I
were
never
they were
thought
not my
that way.
words. Those are not my words. Those were Governor Mark Schweiker's words. They were the first patriots. The war on terror began with the first patriots fighting in the skies above Pennsylvania.
Brilliant.
Yeah,
So
and he's
true.
right. And he goes and he speaks there. He's been there on multiple anniversaries, and um, he just always is pitch perfect at events like that. And he's got a couple speeches from Shanksville on YouTube. Mark Schweiker, highly recommend people look him up if they want to learn more about history and see some of the speeches that were given. Mark has a way. The governor has a way. I still call him governor. Has a way of really wordsmithing impactful moments, and
Yeah.
that was one of them.
Absolutely.
You know, it was
Absolutely
wild when
brilliant.
we were there setting up the pier. Giuliani rolled in with his entourage, and
Yeah,
it was a
America's
powerful moment
mayor.
back then. It was
America's
like,
mayor.
yeah, and it was like, geez, this aura. And I got pretty close to him. I don't know how close I was, but I could see him, no problem. But that
Right.
aura, and I bet you've had that experience, some of that
Yes.
aura, like you're describing with the governor, and
Yes. Yeah, no
larger than
question.
life energy.
Yeah, especially at that time. But yeah, you feel like you're surrounded by history, and you're in a big moment with people who are being asked to meet the moment.
Yes.
And
Yeah.
they don't always succeed, but I give my former boss a lot of credit. He pulled it off.
Even like even George Bush making the first pitch out at Yankee Stadium shortly thereafter.
In a full flak jacket.
Yeah, totally.
Right,
But it was
right.
like, you know what? We're moving on.
America needed
Yeah,
everything. We
right.
needed everything. And I think it's like, to your point, that there's kids that really have no concept at all. People have no concept. And you can't even explain it to them
You
because
can't.
you just can't, like, to understand. It was all of us. We were more united than ever, and we all needed all the
Right.
but we've
things to
lost
get
it.
through it.
Now we're
Well,
divided.
okay,
Now we're more divided
yeah,
than ever, but
it's
yeah,
horrible.
yeah.
It's horrible.
But
Yeah,
I'll tell you this, that's like when I talked about earlier about, like nobody in my generation really, or our generation, none of my high school buddies really wanted to go into the military. Because there just wasn't a lot going on, and that all changed on 9/11.
Yeah,
That all changed on 9/11.
yeah,
yeah.
yeah. So you were talking about covered your professional life, but during that
Sure.
time, you graduate from college, you're a journalist building your
Mm-hmm.
career. And I know earlier you had said you're remarried, I think. So did
Mm-hmm.
you get married during those early years out of college?
Yeah, it would have been 2000. I wasn't married very long.
Okay. Okay.
I wasn't married very long, and I could, it didn't have anything to do with my trauma from childhood. It was just a bad fit. The only thing of note that came from it was my son, who's just the greatest son anybody could ever ask for. Um, but I tell you what, I will tell you that my experience with my father pitting me and my sister against my mother and ridiculing her. I think my father could tell you, or my son could tell you, that he's never heard me say a negative word about his mother. Never. And as it should be.
Yeah, absolutely.
I can't stand when I hear parents putting kids in the middle of something like that. They didn't ask for that, and they're not equipped to deal with it.
Yeah.
And so I'd like to think that part of that helped me really kind of understand early that regardless of my personal feelings in a relationship, um, this young boy does not need to hear how I feel about certain things. He only needs to hear uh, that he's loved, and he should love his mother and his father, and they both love him.
Yep. Absolutely. Did you
Yeah.
guys did you co-parent where you were involved in his life regularly?
Oh, yeah. He was with me most of the time.
Okay.
Yeah, we had 50-50 unwritten, but then it got to the point where it had to be written, and he was with us most of the time. But uh, you know, we made the best of a tough situation, and my son rightly loved his mother, and he was a really good son to his mother, and I'm just so proud of him, and I'm just so proud of the man he's become.
Well, and I'm sure, I'm assuming, but I could be wrong, but through raising him, parts of you healed as you raised him.
I don't know. I don't think of it in those terms, though. I just don't know. I never looked at it as like I feel better about. I just never looked at it. I honestly, I don't know that I was. I don't know that I wanted to deal with any of it. I don't know that I wanted to think about any of it. I just had it over here, and I had moved on from it.
Okay.
I didn't I didn't know that I didn't move on from it, and it started to manifest itself as we discussed, but I felt like I had moved on from it, and I didn't think about it in those ways. And honestly, my grandparent or my parents were older when Gus was born, and they actually had a good relationship with him. And they actually were good grandparents because they were harmless at this point. My dad wasn't doing well, and my mother wasn't doing well, and they both passed, and it was not pretty. I think the years of self abuse really caught up with them in sad and painful ways for them. But they were good grandparents. They couldn't do any damage at that point. All they want to do is spend time with their grandchildren, and I afforded them that.
That's
You know,
wonderful.
it's
That
so
really,
funny though.
that's
It
wonderful that you were able to do
it's
that.
it's so funny though. Like I got along with my old man. Like we had our moments where he didn't want to speak to me for whatever uh, issue he had with me as I became an adult. God knows what the situation was, but we got along, and I was there when he passed. But he had done a will, and we read the will, and the will said he was leaving nothing to me and my sister, which is pretty interesting because he didn't have anything to leave behind. But that was just my dad in a nutshell. Like
Oh my
one minute
goodness.
he's up, the other minute he's down. I tried to be, and his and my sister tried to be, provide as much, show as much grace as we could. And he did not die alone, and he did not die hated. And it's like I said earlier. I don't know what to tell you. He was my dad.
But again, that grace, that being able to say that is a gift for you. You can say
Right.
he did not die alone. He did not die
Right.
hated. That brings you that sense of peace.
Right.
So, and as far as him with the will, I mean, he was consistent at least. Like he still had to do his last jab at you, you know.
Oh, that
So,
man.
but okay, so
Oh,
then
I do think, just to add to
yeah,
that, though, I do think it's more than a gift to yourself. I think it's a gift to your children to see
yes,
you as a good dad. So
right.
it isn't just a self-serving thing. And I know
right.
you're not suggesting that, but I do
No,
think
no,
it's
yeah.
a
Right.
wonderful,
A good,
different model. You broke
I
the
think
cycle.
a good man,
right.
a good
Yeah.
I
man.
think it. I think about it differently. I think about parenting differently. To follow up on that, and so I'll text my son and my daughter several times during the week, just tell them I love them.
Hmm.
Hmm.
And
It,
just they want. I just want them to know, because you never know. We're not guaranteed one more day. We think we are, but I want them. I don't want there to be any confusion.
Are are they receptive to that, or do they think it's kind of corny?
I
That's
think they're
my
receptive to it. I think it's probably a little corny to my 14-year-old because everything I do is corny.
yeah, yeah.
Like anybody out there who is a father of a daughter, you are their hero until a certain age, and then when that age comes, you embarrass them just when you walk into a room and have
Yeah.
done nothing, but just walking into that room is embarrassing to them.
Yeah.
And so I understand that, and I know that's part of the thing. But I
yes,
love that. I love my daughter, man. She is just the coolest little kid. But I think my son appreciates it now that he's older,
yeah.
Yeah.
and I'm just very, very lucky with children. Very, very lucky.
I'm here to tell you we have a 25-year-old daughter, and so they do go through that, but then
Has
he
she apologized to you guys yet? As I hear that when they get to 25, they apologize. Say, I know how bad I was. I
y-
just want you to know you were right, and I'm so sorry.
you know when we both of our older two came home at two different times. They went away to college and they came home and were like, "Thank you for giving us a good childhood," because they were exposed to people who
Other
didn't get a
people.
good childhood. And like their biggest issue was they drove a hand-me-down car. Ooh, that's their
Oh
adversity in
my
life,
gosh.
So
They
it made them realize, okay, you guys gave us a real, and they at different stages. Our
right.
older son first went away and came home one day and said thank you, and then our
Right.
daughter. So that was the thank you and the appreciation. But I will tell you, even though there's that brief moment where she might find you embarrassing, then they get older, and my daughter thinks of him as her hero 100%. Like that,
Yeah.
that comes right back around again, and that
Makes it
closure
all cool, doesn't
makes
it? Makes
it
it all
the
cool.
best. And
I
that
love being
father,
Yeah.
the
a
father,
dad to a daughter.
yeah,
I
Yeah.
like being a dad in general. The boys and I have different relationships, but the daughter is,
Right.
it's a unique
she's your little.
experience.
I
Yeah.
was just, I was thinking, as much as you compartmentalized your childhood as you were raising
Yeah.
your son, you still did different. You
Right.
still did. So it, as much as it wasn't there, it
That's
was
a good
there
point.
enough for you to be aware that you're going to do different. So it was over here, but it was still guiding you to
That's a
not
good
do
point.
that,
I had
so it
not
still
thought
had
of
to be
that. I had
attached.
not thought of it that way. That's a good
Yeah.
point.
You still did different. Now, so you remarried. So when did you meet your wife?
That would have been, hmm. So we've been married 18 years, and you're gonna ask me to do math, and so it was around 2006, somewhere in there, and you know the whole deal. You date for a few years, and we had both been married previously, so you know it was. Then we had the adult wedding where nobody was really invited, and it was small, and we actually went to Las Vegas, just the two
Oh,
of us.
Where we go,
we got
man?
Just
married there.
oh yeah, just had a little fun. Went to
Yeah,
Las Vegas.
yeah.
Nobody was invited, much to the chagrin of her mother, my mother-in-law. She couldn't understand that, but we're like, we're just gonna go have some fun, and that's what we
Nice.
did.
Nice. That's and then you
Yeah,
have your daughter.
yeah, and Stella came in. So we married in eight. She was born 3 years later in 2011, and
Okay.
now she's 14, and she's like any American teenage girl. She loves wrestling. It's crazy. The wrestling. I'm just kidding, but wrestling's so popular. Girls wrestling's so popular here in Pennsylvania and really catching on around the country. She loves to wrestle and play field hockey, and she cares about her grades, and she makes it. You know, outside of the temperamental issues, she makes parenting pretty easy.
That's awesome. That's
Yeah,
awesome. Now, what
yeah.
about you and your sister? Are you guys close?
Yeah, she lives in the Chicago area. She's actually getting married in August. This will be her second. I'll be careful on how much I say about my sister, but we are close.
Mm.
Can't wait to see her. Love the guy she's marrying, an English bloke.
Mm.
A really good dude.
Nice.
Can't understand him half the time, even though he's speaking the Queen's English. I can't understand him and but he's a fantastic guy. They're getting married in Chicago in August, and just really looking forward to seeing them.
That's very
And
cool.
we and you know my sister and I have had our ups and downs through the years. We don't didn't always communicate well, and I think there was some trauma involved there, and maybe just kind of avoiding each other a little bit. But our relationship, I think, is better than ever. And 'cause we make a point of communicating and sharing information. My sister's a bit of a world traveler, which I really love about her. And anywhere I have to go, anytime I have to go somewhere, she's always got like 10 great ideas for me. And call this person, they can give you great ideas on where you should stop and maybe, you know, blah, blah, blah. She's just always got great kernels of travel information, which I love. And, you know, in a lot of ways, she really helped me with the book, really helped me remember things, really kind of slot things in their proper time places, and told me shit I didn't know that she never told anybody. And, I really needed her to be okay with me writing it. I needed that. And
Yeah.
and, I'd like to say I wouldn't have written it if she said no. I don't know. But I mean, it was really important to get her sign off on it, and then she was very very helpful with the whole thing. And um, I'm just really lucky to be her brother.
I think it's amazing. You guys are like two survivors who are now kind of went on a little healing journey together and have
Yeah, in a way, yeah, it
supported
really
each
was.
other. Because I'm sure helping you with the book also, she went through some stuff having to relive and go through. When your mom passed in 2024, um, did that just trigger this desire to write so hard?
Me, yes,
Yeah.
yes. That was like I remember thinking like if I'm ever gonna do this, now's the time to do it. And you need to get sign off from your wife on that because it's a you got to be selfish with your time.
Yeah.
And My wife has been incredibly supportive of the whole situation. Um, she doesn't want to read it. She wanted to be part of the reading, like going through it while I was writing it, which I totally respected. I mean, who would want to read it? I mean, at that stage,
Right.
and knowing this is how her husband grew up, and I think there'll be a time when she wants to read it, but I totally respected her whole position of you just write, okay? I'll take care of things, and not that I just receded from family, but I needed that time. It's like a second job. It is a second job.
Yeah.
And so people are like, how can you write? The uh, first draft was 130,000 words.
Wow.
And I work with a consultant on it who's a former agent, blah 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 blah, and he's like, you got to get it to about 90,000. That's a
Oh
sweet
wow.
spot. Yeah, that's a sweet spot. That actually wasn't that hard because I overwrote on purpose, knowing that I'm probably
Gonna
going
edit
to
it.
have to trim it back, and I always kind of you're sort of just marked off in my mental process like these are areas that I would probably look at cutting.
Hmm.
And I just got into a groove of writing 1,000 words a day minimum. If I hit 1,000 and I had a tight day, like I'm up at 5 a.m. writing, trying to pound 1,000 words out.
How many pages is that roughly?
That'll be about 300 somewhere in there, 320. Average size of a novel
I
or a
mean,
memoir.
1,000 words. How
A
many
day.
a day?
Oh,
Yeah. Oh,
oh yeah,
Gosh,
1,000 words a
damn,
day.
you're
yeah.
Yeah.
you're a typer.
Yeah, but when you're a writer, you don't think about it like I don't think 1,000 is a lot to write a day at all.
Yeah. I
It's just about being consistent.
it's coming
Yeah.
through you. Like
Yeah,
once you
pretty
made that
much.
decision,
Yep.
it's like it's there and it's just the writing is the tool to get it out.
Right.
It's just flowing. That's
Right.
the beautiful part of it. So how long did you work on it?
Probably a year and a half.
Mm.
Um, and then you put together the whole book proposal, and that process has been as hard as writing a book. And from here on out, writing the book I've learned is the easy part about getting a book published. You think it's the hard part. Like people are like, oh wow, holy shit, you wrote 90,000 words. I go, well, actually, it was 130,000. Um, but that was the easy part. The hard part is, you want to sell it to a major publishing house. You got to hire the right agent, and I'm going through all that stuff right now, and it's just not that easy. It's not that easy. But I've got lots of good signs, and things are headed in the right direction, and I'm really pleased right now with the progress that we're making on it, and I can't wait to share it with you someday.
Yeah,
Can't wait to
definitely.
read it.
Yeah, I can't wait to read it. So now did
There's
you
so
ever
many things you don't know that you
Yeah,
can only say so many things
yes,
on a show,
yes,
like there's
yes.
so
I'm
many.
No.
curious, is it fiction or is it like
Oh,
first
it's real.
this is
It's
my
yeah.
autobiography type of thing?
It is a memoir.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, it is a memoir. And it's written from I. It's
Okay.
first person.
Cool.
I,
Now
not David.
your company can your
Mhm.
company have any part of promoting the book or is it
Oh,
that
sure. I mean, I've got 20 years experience in marketing. I mean, there would certainly be an opportunity that we would do, and we would use, every contact we have to try and, help sell the book. And I think it's a powerful, I think we have most authors don't know step one about marketing, and
yeah.
we've got a whole infrastructure built that would certainly be helpful in that makes it that really made the book more attractive to people. So
So it sounds
because at
like
the end of the day, art's great and everything, great writing's great, but books got to sell.
oh yeah.
you know
Absolutely. It sounds like that's what you're working on now because your hope is 2027, right?
Yeah, that's exactly right. I just
Okay.
wish I had a date, and I wish I could tell you like January 2027. But I mean, it's a whole process. I mean, and then you got to go through. You're never really done writing it because there's editing. There's
Right.
editing, and maybe you need to add this. But every step of the way, the book's been made better, and I can't argue.
It's got to be when you get to that point where it's out there and it's on the shelves and
Oh,
the feeling is going to be just euphoric, I think, for you for so many reasons.
sort of scary in a way too, because like it's the whole. Uh, it's my whole family history. Like I'm bearing it,
Yeah.
I'm laying it
Yeah.
bare right there. And, that's why I won't independently publish. Like it has to go through a major publishing house or I'm not going to release it, and
Yeah.
but I'm at that point now where everything's looking really good and I feel great about the whole situation.
That's awesome.
People,
Yeah.
yeah, people are
Yeah.
like, why wouldn't you independently publish? I'm like, I'm not tearing the heart out of my family's history and I don't have any problems with people independently publishing, but when it's something that personal,
Yeah.
you know, I, I want to be able to get it to the widest audience possible if I'm going to do it.
It's like if you're taking the risk, you need to go the whole way with it.
Right. That's the way, and I think it's good enough too. I think, and that's not. being brash or cocky, or I just know that it's good enough. I know
Oh,
it.
listen, if this time you've spent with us is any indication, I have no question. It's going to
Oh,
be a phenomenal book and a success. And
very kind of you.
I have a theory about when you create something, once you put it out there, it almost doesn't belong to you anymore. It belongs
That's
to
a good point.
the reader, the
Yeah.
consumer,
It's
and
now everybody's.
however they
I
interpret
think
it,
that's a great
it's
approach.
it's there. It
Now,
doesn't.
now it's yours.
Now it's yours. It
Yeah.
doesn't have anything to do with you anymore, good or bad.
Like
Right.
You
Right.
music.
know, it's like music. Like you may not like
Yeah.
it, you may like it, but it really isn't my business because I created it and I put it out there. Now it belongs to you.
I
And
absolutely agree
it
with that.
frees you a little bit,
Absolutely.
you know?
I absolutely
So
agree with that.
yeah, yeah. I mean,
Yeah.
so as I mentioned, I want to have you back on when it's time to
Sure.
promote the book.
And
If
I would
you'd
love
like
to
to
do
come
that.
back on. Um, and before I ask my last question, I just want to make that clear to listeners is you will hear more about David's book. So this isn't the end of the story. We are going
Can
to
I tell you the title of the book?
yes, please.
Soda.
I love that. I
That's
love
awesome.
that. That's perfect.
That's the title of the book.
I
That's
love it.
People
perfect. Yeah.
That's
people
awesome.
don't know why it says it's soda, and then they understand pretty quickly.
Absolutely.
What
And for
chapter?
years I knew that. For years it's chapter 10.
Chapter 10.
For years I knew that was the name of the book. For years, like because I'll never forget that moment. Never
So
forget it.
it's been sitting with you for a while then.
Yeah, yeah.
And it was more just when your mom passed, you finally felt you could go
I
for
felt
it.
like I had to. I felt like, and you can talk about the personal medicinal qualities of getting that book out of you. But I really want people, and looking forward to having that conversation with you when the time comes. I want people to realize they don't have to become like their parents, and you can become better, and you can break that cycle, which we've talked a little bit about. As Generation X kids, breaking that trauma cycle of growing up in that generation where parents were pretty carefree with their parenting responsibilities. And I just want people to realize, like, if I can do it, like, I'm nobody special. And I truly mean that. You can do it too. And drugs are still a prevalent issue in our society. They just take on different forms. By the way, cocaine's as dangerous as ever because now it's laced with fentanyl and it's still widely used. But now you have fentanyl, you have opiates. I mean, drug use continues to be a scourge for families across cities and, like we saw in my situation, suburban America.
Yeah.
And so I think there's a lesson. It's not just a Gen X story, but it's an important story about Gen X, Generation X. And I talk about Generation X a lot in my book and what it was like to grow up at that time. And how, in many ways, being a Gen X kid saved me, and growing up with the pop culture of Gen X was so important to me, and how it all fits and weaves into the story. Um, but it's more than that. I mean, it's I hope it gives some sort of a roadmap to kids right now who are going through what I went through, or adults dealing with trauma that I dealt with in some similar fashion, that you can get out on the other side here.
Yeah. That's amazing. And I think that it will resonate with so many people and help people feel seen and not alone. And
Right.
that's your intention. And so much with um what we put out in the world, intention matters.
Right.
And intention affects success. I'm a believer in that,
So
because
true.
and so you're putting it out there with this intention to help people. So in addition to it being a riveting story, so it's it's an
Thank
interesting
you.
story that will hold people's attention in general, but it's going to affect a lot of families because you're right. The drug crisis is still going on. It's just so it's more insidious and
Well,
quiet.
it's circled back.
Yeah.
I'm
Yeah.
sure the Harrisburg area, you're ground zero for the opioid epidemic.
In many ways.
Yeah.
Oh yeah.
Targeted communities.
I'm telling you, it's rough.
Yeah.
It's
And you're right.
rough.
Coke is back. Like it went away for a while. It's
Yeah.
back. It's back. It's in the frats. It's back. And it's very
Yeah.
dangerous. And it
And
is.
you hear stories about people actually testing Coke before they use it for fentanyl.
Oh, yeah.
And it's like, I can't even imagine that you would trust a test for something like that. Like, just don't do it.
Yeah.
Yep.
Just don't do it. Like, you would really, okay, so that tested negative and you're going to trust that?
Yep.
And then you're going to do that? Like, no, thanks, man. I
No.
mean,
It's crazy. It's absolutely crazy. Do you have any
Yeah,
questions
I
before I
do.
ask my last
I actually
question?
have two. I'm
Okay.
curious.
sure.
When you got involved at Penn State,
Yeah,
what was your guys' playbook for like, you kind of go in, you're like, all right, they're tripping all over themselves.
right.
What's your move there?
Well, two things. One of the most important things in a crisis situation is really, and it sounds kind of counterintuitive, but to be responsive to the media. And Penn State for years had been really obstinate, and they didn't need anybody, and they didn't need to talk to the media, and they would talk to the media on their own terms. And we're Penn State, and we're a big shot, blah, 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 blah. I made sure we returned phone calls and emails and, hey, I can't get you that answer. I apologize. We just don't have a comment on that. It's all about building relationships in a lot of ways and showing people that you're respectful of their time. I was a journalist, and I like to think that's very helpful to me in my current profession. And I would know when a reporter feels slighted. If I call you at 9 a.m. and say I'm on a 5 o'clock deadline and I need an answer on such and such, and you make me wait all day and call me back at 4:55 and say, I'm sorry, we're not going to comment, I'm only human, and I'm going to have a reaction to that. And it likely doesn't lead to a story that might be somewhat innocuous, could end up being even worse. Because listen, everybody gets mad on the job. Nobody's perfect. People, how how dare you make me feel disrespected? So a lot of what we do is be respectful of a reporter's time, be responsive, answer when you can, and then be honest when you can't comment, and let them know. But if I know I'm not going to get an answer, I know that I need to get back to them before lunchtime. It's little things like that
Yeah, yeah.
that are so important during a crisis, because then, when people are talking about the crisis and reporters are being asked and doing panels, well, hey, Penn State has been responsive. They've really stepped up. They're getting back to us. They're giving us information when they can. They can't always give us something, but they try. You be as transparent as you can. Transparent's a bad word to use during a crisis because it means something different to everyone else. So I try not to use the word transparent. Don't ever promise transparency, because you can never be transparent enough for everybody. And I think that's a fair criticism. So don't say you're going to be transparent, because there's going to be moments where people say you're not.
Right.
So what we try and do is answer as many questions as we can. If we can't answer it, we'll tell you we can't answer it, but we're going to be honest up front about it. And I thought those were really some really important points. And honestly, trying to find out in a crisis who's the best person to be a spokesperson that works at Penn State, that is credible. Like, that's the person you're looking for. It's not always, whether it's a company or a Penn State, it's not always the president or the CEO. I mean, sometimes they're really bad on camera.
Yeah.
And I want somebody who's a good messenger. And, we were fortunate in Penn State. I want to be careful how I talk about a client, because it's still,
Yeah.
I look at it as attorney-client privilege, even though I'm not a
Yeah.
lawyer, but I think I need to be respectful. But I think I can talk about it in general terms. And I certainly think we identified who that person or people were at Penn State. But those are the two things I think about right away. Who can deliver my message? And let's make sure we're very responsive to the media. And that goes a long, long way, because you can't solve a crisis overnight, and I can't work miracles. All I can do is help you survive until it ends. That's really what a crisis is all about. Is you can't fix it. I mean, the Sandusky stuff happened. You can't change history. That's how you would solve that, is by changing. Well, I can't do that. So what can I do to make Penn State come out on the other side and survive this? It's about long term. That's how I always think about something. Lawyers, when I work with them on a crisis, and I can go on and on about this for hours, so I'll be quick. Lawyers are worried about short term fallout. I'm always worried about long term reputation. So I got to get you through to the other side. And sometimes it's all about surviving and eating shit sandwiches day after day after day.
That's a great summary, because I've seen that, which leads to my next question. Do you get into like like cyber issues at all? Whether our company's been hacked and they bring you in to help manage that message?
Early on during cyber attacks, it was devastating for companies. But now it's become more and more commonplace as consumers and people who might be, I don't know, an employee or have their money at a bank and a bank gets hacked, or in their people's personal information is compromised so often now
Yeah.
that it's become expected and almost commonplace. But early on, it was a very big. Now, listen, if there's a huge cyber attack and people's sensitive medical records all across the country are being exposed, that's different. But
Yeah.
I mean, by and large, people just kind of expect it now, and it's kind of sad.
Yeah,
Even
it's
that's an
crazy.
email saying your
Yeah.
personal health records were part
Right?
of a large breach.
Right.
Change your password.
And then it's like you get
Yeah.
90 days or 6 months of free monitoring,
Yeah.
Which, by the
so
way, I have, because I've been a victim of a couple widespread company
Yeah.
attacks. And what am I going to do?
yeah.
So, but it is funny that you bring up the messaging, because I always look at it, like,
Yeah.
how would I have messaged this? And it's become so commonplace now that people just think it's the price of doing business.
Yeah.
They do, even the consumer. A quick question to
Yeah.
follow up. You
Uh-huh.
said your firm, it's interesting. You're based on you're trying to get them through and hold on to a long-term reputation.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Is that what PR firms do, like for celebrities? Are they trying to just get them through and hold on to their reputation, or are they approaching it more like the lawyers do of let's just deal with this one moment right now?
Um, I don't work on celebrities, so I don't want to answer the question as if I'm an authority on it.
Okay.
But if I had to deal with a celebrity's legal issues, it would be all about long-term viability.
Okay.
Because I think it's kind of the same thing, like a short-term, long-term for a celebrity. Well, it's all about like it's their career. They're a celebrity, so they've got a career, and their career is at stake.
Yeah.
And so I would approach everything like, we're going to change your image. You're going to be, we're gonna, but we got to work on you being credible, and then hopefully we can save your reputation long term. But I have to be honest with you, I've turned down lots of crisis clients because I don't agree with them. I don't agree with what they've done, or who they are as a business, or I've turned multiple well-paying opportunities down because I don't want to be associated with certain things like that. Well then people say, well, how could you be associated with Penn State during Jerry Sandusky? Well, Penn State has a alumni network of 600,000 people and thousands of people who work on the campus every day, who are good people who want to change the world, or or janitors, restaurant workers, who depend on Penn State, people who love Penn State. And it means that every day I went to work for Penn State, I would think about people like my wife who graduated from Penn State, and I'd want to help those people.
Yeah.
Because Penn State means so much to them. That's why I can represent Penn State. Did some people in Penn State do something wrong? You bet they did, and some people went to jail for it. But I'm not helping them. I'm helping the people who love Penn State and poured their lives into it.
That makes sense. That makes such
It
sense.
does. It's so
Yeah.
much bigger than just two people. Even though
Yeah.
Paterno, you could argue, put Penn State on the map,
Yeah.
you know,
No,
a lot more there.
that really makes sense. Did you have any other
Sure.
questions?
No, we were at Penn State last year, and wonderful campus,
Yeah, it's a
great
great
dairy.
town. Yeah, the ice
It's
cream.
it's my favorite college town.
Yeah,
Yeah, it's
And I like
awesome.
and I like I'm a big college football fan, so every year I try and hit a different campus, and I keep comparing everything to State College, and State College is just a fabulous place. By the way, full disclosure, I'm not even a Penn State fan, which I actually think helped me represent them, was not being a Penn Stater.
hmm
right.
Too many people get emotional, and you can't be emotional in a crisis. Full
No.
disclosure, I'm a Notre Dame football fan, so I mean, so I'm in enemy territory in a lot of ways, but we seem to have worked it out.
It's a cool place. We
That's
had
funny.
a really
Oh,
good time.
Yeah.
it's my favorite college place. Yeah.
Both of our older two went to Florida State, which is also a
I'd
gorgeous
recommend that
campus.
if you're into
Right.
college football.
Florida State's
it's its
beautiful.
I
own.
know I got to get down there. That's absolutely on the list. Tallahassee, going there to see a game is
Well,
It's fun.
absolutely on the list.
Tallahassee is not State College. I'm not going to sell you Tallahassee.
And I didn't think you were, and I know that, and I've got plenty of feedback. But the next time Notre Dame goes to Tallahassee, I'll probably go to the game.
Yeah. Now the
Yeah.
campus is insane. It's beautiful, and the stadium is electric. And actually,
Right.
like anything around FSU is like a little vibe, a little area. It's
Right.
just- and there are good parts. There's great restaurants and all that, but then there's parts of
Right.
Tallahassee that's like, eh.
I like
So-
Tallahassee.
yeah, there's just parts.
Yeah.
Party
So
town.
yeah, yes.
Yeah,
My
I
last
bet.
my last question is
Sure.
always, where do you see yourself in 5 years?
Yeah, that's a great question. Where do I see myself in 5 years? Well, I'll be 61 at the time, and if I get there, and I'll be shocked that I'm in my 60s because I feel like I'm better than I've ever been in my life. I'm in the best physical condition of my life. I'm in a great place mentally in my life now. I couldn't feel any better. And if I had any thoughts about 5 years, they would be very simple things like I hope I continue to be healthy. I hope my family's healthy, and I get to enjoy my daughter now being 19 at this point and in college, and maybe my son with some grandchildren. I don't know, but I don't really try and put too many X's down on a timeline in my life, because I really enjoy what I do, and I don't think I'll ever retire. Does that mean I'll certainly scale back, but I love what I do. Love the fact that we spend time in Cape May, New Jersey. It's just a magical place for me. And if I can continue on this line for the next 5 years, I think I'll be pretty happy.
I think that sounds wonderful. I think what you
Yeah.
described is a dream, honestly. Like it
Right.
sounds great, especially coming, if you look back where you came from, that's just the calmness, the fact that you can enjoy the calmness shows how much
Right.
healing you've gone through, that
Right.
you get it. Like I always say to my kids, contentment is the key. The whole
Mm,
meaning of life and happiness. And what is happiness? It's contentment.
sure is.
That's what it's not boring. It's beautiful. Just being content.
Yeah.
No high
Well
ups,
said.
no lows, it's
Well said.
nice and level. But until you've gone through some things, you understand that's really it is that contentment. But
Right.
One thing I just wanted to add, I do love your
Sure.
approach and not just self-publishing and going big.
Mhm.
Go for it, chase it. And
Yeah.
because
Yeah.
I do think you've got a hell of a story that will resonate with people and might give them a playbook of kind of maybe how to navigate things or just not to give up, right?
Yeah.
Just
Hope.
keep going. It's
Hope.
all
Thank
good.
you.
We
Thank you
can't
so
thank
much.
you enough, David, for not just spending so much time with us, but being so candid and open about
Sure.
your life and sharing with us and with our listeners. And even before this book comes out, anyone who listens to this podcast, this is going to help some people. I know
I
it.
hope so. And
Even
that's
if
why I
it
did
helps
it.
families, yeah,
Yeah.
no, it's going to help
I
people
love your
feel
format,
pain.
by the way. I love the
Thank you.
format. I mean, it was just when I wrote you guys, I just like this is a great show, and it's even better because you have guitars on your walls in the background, and I'm like, only Gen X people would have guitars on walls. I mean, that's just such a cool look.
I
Such a
think
cool
what
Thank
look.
really
you.
makes it
Thank you.
Gen X is we can't play any of them.
It's
We've
so
tried,
true.
but
He's
It's so
tried.
I've
cool,
tried.
though. It's so cool.
He's tried,
Well
but they
said.
look really good, and
Yeah.
they're
They look
good. They
damn
make
good.
the studio look cool.
Yeah.
So,
I
but he
agree.
did try. But no, thank you again.
No, thank
And
you.
Yeah,
and
appreciate it.
I mean, I just your whole story, and I know that I'm sure you have people in your life telling you, how amazing it is where you are now compared to where you came
Right.
from and everything in between. But from outsiders looking in and from someone who went through a very traumatic childhood, I just want to say you should be so, so proud of yourself. And I don't
Totally.
think people tell Gen Xers that enough. I don't
Right.
think
Right.
anyone told us that. I
Right.
think we should tell each other, you really should be proud of
Right.
yourself. And it's really as simple as that. You really should. And
Thank you.
also, you should be proud of that young boy because he did it. He got out and he did it. And if you could go back and tell him, don't worry, it's going to be okay. I'm going to get you there. I got you. And that's what you did. You did that for him. And so I just find this an incredibly poignant moment in your life. And I'm
Thank you.
so
Thanks for
excited.
sharing with
Yeah,
us, man.
thank you.
It's
And I'm
just
so excited about the
amazing.
book that other people will
Thank
have
you.
access to this
Yeah.
because it's going to be a huge help for so many
Thank you
people.
for your kind words, and they
Yeah.
do not go unappreciated.
Yeah.
Thank you very much.
Well, thank you. And I hope
Thank
you'll
you.
come back.
Oh, I would love to come back. This has been
Okay.
awesome. It's been
Okay.
awesome, and we can share more details next time. So
Yeah. Well,
you'll
I
have it in
definitely,
front of you, hopefully, and it's all
absolutely. And also, I
yeah.
want to go into the pop culture references because I love
Oh,
talking
sure.
about Gen X pop culture. I love that.
There's so
So,
much in that book about it. Like it is really. I mean, just because it's everything I remember. I feel defined by being Generation X, more 1980s Generation X, even though I was born in 70, but I really identify with that whole Breakfast Club culture of the 80s and Miami Vice and it's all coming around again. Like a Miami Vice movie set in the 80s is coming out next year, and like
great.
we lived in the no matter how fucked up it was, like we lived in the best time,
We
like in
did.
the
Yeah.
best times. Like you went out and played and you didn't stare at a phone, and
Yeah.
you rode bikes and you learned how to solve conflicts one-on-one with people, and I wouldn't trade that for the world.
No, and I think even fashion wise, like we took
Oh,
chances. Like we
damn right.
really, each of us were like little fashion icons. When I look back at it and I compare it to now, I think kids are more scared of taking fashion risks because everyone's taking pictures and filming, and that
Really great point.
inhibition
Really great. Yeah.
isn't. They don't have the gift of inhibition because they're
So
nervous they're
true.
going to get a picture taken, where we could like do whatever, and now they're trying to
Right.
imitate a lot of it. So no,
Yes, they are.
I definitely want to get, when we're going over your book, dive in a little bit more into the pop
Sure.
culture reference. So
Looking
we're
forward
looking
to it.
forward to that. And listeners, anywhere you can find David will be in the show notes. So and please leave any comments or questions, and he will see them on the social media. And of course, we always love to hear from you. Please leave us any comments or questions. And thank you for listening. We'll see you next time. Bye.